Chapter 789. Du Yuxiong Plain, Liangzhu. While Wuxia was dividing the authority of his subordinates in the East Sea City and matchmaking the dragon python, the atmosphere in King Baishan's mansion was extremely tense. A few experienced and steady servants were carefully cleaning the bloodstains in the courtyard with plant ashes, and carefully wiping the huge stone floor until it was as clean and shiny as a mirror. In the great hall, King Baishan sat behind a stone table with a gloomy face, his upper body bared. He was clad in a pair of hempen trousers and nothing else on his person. Two naked girls were lying in front of the stone table. Their necks were twisted at a weird angle. One of the girls had a 3-inch deep cyan fist mark in the middle of her spine. It was obvious that they had died in an unusual way. A few beautiful young girls with slender bodies like spring willows stood in the corner of the hall, trembling. Their frightened eyes swept between the legs of the two young girls on the ground from time to time. There was blood and filth flowing down slowly. It was clear that they had been raped and then killed. Faint cries could be heard coming from the two naked corpses. It was the sound of their souls being imprisoned on the surface of the corpses by a spell. Anyone with a little bit of cultivation base could see two pale green human-shaped smoke twisting and struggling above the corpses, but no matter how hard they tried, they could not get more than 3 feet away from them. King Yangshan looked old, but his exposed body was stronger than that of an ordinary young man. Under his smooth and moist skin, his muscles were full of strength like steel ingots, and twisted blue veins were wriggling under his skin. Every time his heart beat, his blood vessels would twitch slightly, and the sound of blood flowing could be heard coming from them. A little man carved of black jade was placed on the stone table. King Baishan stared fixedly at the cracks that covered its surface like cobwebs as he murmured to himself. Who killed my son? Jiju's cultivation base is only at the 3 stars realm of the second Panga heaven. But in fact, his cultivation base has long broken through to the 9 stars realm of the second Panga heaven. Once I get the Wu Yen from His Majesty, I'll be able to help him forcibly break through the second Panga heaven and reach the Hongmeng Panga heaven, forming the minor Panga's sacred body. Clenching his fists so tightly that his knuckles creaked, King Baishan gritted his teeth and said, "Who else but a supreme oracle or a primordial expert can kill my son?" Suddenly, a beautiful woman in a long black dress and adorned with many jade ornaments rushed out of the back of the hall, crying. She threw herself at King Baishan and cried, "Your Highness, you must avenge Jin." Frowning, King Baishan slapped the woman's neck with a backhand and knocked her out. He shouted coldly, "Who told this to Wang Fei? Drag this blabbermouth out and behead him. Kill all his relatives for this king. Send Wang Fei back to the backyard and lock her up in the Xianbingyin prison so that she can sober up. Her crying is so annoying." At King Baishan's order, a few plump shrews strode out of the hall, grabbed King Baishan's wife, and ran madly toward the Xianbingyin prison behind the mansion. A few of Wang Feishan's maidservants were dragged out by a group of ferocious guards. No matter which of them told Wang Feishan about King Zhangqiu's death, these beautiful maidservants were beheaded before they could cry and beg for mercy. At the same time, some guards had rushed to the maidservants' homes with soldiers and killed their entire families. Heads rolled and blood flowed all over the ground. The pungent smell of blood and the heads of a few beautiful women placed on the stone table in front of him made King Baishan feel a little better. He grabbed the head of a maidservant and slowly stroked her cheek as he murmured in a low voice, "I don't care who killed Ji Yao. I'll wipe out your entire clan. Somebody tell me, what has King Zhangqiu been busy with these days?" 2 immortals in white robes walked out slowly. They exchanged a glance, then cupped their fists and bowed to King Baishan at the same time. "Your Highness, the young master has not been in Liangzhu these days, and we really don't know what he has been doing." "Oh." King Baishan gave the 2 immortals a cold look and snorted coldly. Suddenly, the maidservant's head in his palm turned into a wisp of smoke and drifted away. He bowed his head and thought for a while, then gritted his teeth and said with a grim smile, "Go and find out what Ji Yao has been doing recently, and find out who he has a grudge against recently." Pointing a finger in a certain direction, King Baishan said with a cold snort, "Go and find out if anyone in that mansion is out these days, and find out if anyone with strong enough cultivation base to kill Ji Yao has suddenly disappeared in Liangzhu. In short, don't let go of any clues." I want you to thoroughly investigate anyone who might have killed Ji Yao." The two white-robed immortals bowed deeply in silence and accepted King Baishan's order, then hurried out of the great hall, lest King Baishan suddenly lose his temper and execute them like the maidservants. This was Liangzhu, the heart of Du. If King Baishan wanted to kill a few immortals he had been secretly raising, he did not need any excuse, nor did he need to waste any effort. As soon as the two immortals left, Lu Bang strode into the great hall with a straight face, clad in the robe of an immortal king. King Baishan gave Lu Bang a cold look, his face suddenly twisted to the extreme. He pressed both hands on the stone table, gnashed his teeth, and glared at Lu Bang as he roared. "Lu Bang, is this what you promised me? Ji Yao can become the human emperor? But he's dead, he's dead, he's dead." King Baishan clenched one of his teeth so hard that it was broken. Pointing a finger at Lu Bang, he growled, "Are the promises of the celestial court all bullshit?" Lu Bang swaggered over to a table next to King Baishan and sat down. With an appreciative smile on his face, he glanced at the two female corpses lying on the ground, then at the heads of several beautiful women on the table. He sighed softly and said, "These two on the ground are not bad. What a pity, judging from the corners of their eyes and brows. They were still virgins before they died. What a waste." King Baishan smashed the stone table in front of him with a palm and roared, "I'm telling you, Ji Yao is dead." Lu Bang gave King Baishan a sideways glance and said with a cold grin, "So what if he's dead? You don't lack a son like him. King Zhangqiu is dead, but don't you still have King Yangqiu and a few other sons? In particular, King Yangqiu's aptitude is better than King Zhangqiu's, and his cultivation base is even higher than King Zhangqiu's. It's just that the status of his birth mother is a little lower. But as a man, you shouldn't judge him by his birth mother's status." King Baishan trembled with anger. What was Lu Bang talking about? What a mess! What a complete disregard for human morality! What a bastard to the extreme! Stroking his beard, Lu Bang said slowly, "Bring me good wine, good food, and beautiful women. Your Highness, I'm here to bring you good news." King Baishan grinned hideously, then suddenly clapped his hands and said through gritted teeth, "Good news? Bah." As King Baishan clapped his hands, dozens of heavily armed generals quietly appeared out of thin air, brandishing their blades and swords as they surrounded Lu Bang. Their faces were expressionless, but their eyes gleamed with a blood-red gleam. Clearly, they were fierce generals who had killed countless people on the battlefield, and judging from their threatening auras, they all had the cultivation base of peak second Pango heaven. Lu Bang gave King Baishan a look, then sighed and shook his head. "If your Highness wants to give up a chance to have one of your sons become an expert of Hongming Pango heaven, then you can do it to me." King Baishan was taken aback. After hesitating for a long time, he finally waved his hand gently. He coughed once, and a few maids immediately brought in fine wine and delicacies. There were also beautiful dancers in revealing clothes singing and dancing in the main hall, performing all kinds of enchanting and charming dance moves. King Baishan glanced at the little figure carved out of black jade on the table that represented King Zhangqiu's safety, then waved his sleeve and turned it into dust that drifted away. In just a few breaths of time, King Baishan had begun to forget that he once had a proud son named King Zhangqiu. Looking at Lu Bang as if nothing had happened, he said in a flat voice, "You mean King Tangqiu, don't you? How can you guarantee that he won't be killed like his brother?" Lu Bang chuckled and said in a steady voice, "How about we make King Tangqiu an existence who can stand shoulder to shoulder with a primordial immortal first? There are going to be major natural disasters in several mortal worlds, and if King Tangqiu can rescue those mortals, the virtues bestowed upon him will be enough to advance his cultivation base. With the help of the spirit herbs and mystic arts of Buddhism from the celestial court, won't it be a piece of cake for King Tangqiu, who has already reached the peak of second Pango heaven?" King Baishan pondered for a moment, then nodded and said, "That doesn't seem to be enough." Lu Bang nodded and said, "The previous agreement still stands. Ji Tao will be the candidate for the human emperor, and once the plan of the Celestial Court and Buddhism League succeeds, the current human emperor will certainly be ousted. At that time, haha." After a few laughs, Lu Bang narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, "Your Highness, you just have to remember that when the time is right, Your Highness will mobilize a part of Liangzhu's army to attack the 33 heavens and the sacred Vulture Mountain. King Baishan took a deep breath, reached out a hand, grabbed a dancer who had come to his side, and pressed her head hard against his crotch. Gritting his teeth and pondering for a while, King Baishan snorted coldly and said, I don't want to see what happened to Ji Tao again. Ji Tao is my favorite son. Since you've made the promise, you have to make sure that nothing bad happens to him, and that he will sit on the throne safely. Impatiently, Lu Bang grabbed 4 dancers and pressed them to the ground. While undressing himself, he said with a smile, Don't worry, Your Highness. King Zhongqiu's death this time was a complete accident. Who would have thought that the Marquis of East Sea Province would show up with Kunwu swords? With the fiend-slaying sword formation here. How could King Zhongqiu not die? King Baishan was so frightened that he jumped to his feet, and the dancer under his crotch cried out in pain as a row of teeth was pulled out of her mouth by him. Glaring at Lu Bang, he roared, What did you say? Kunwu swords? Yi. Lu Bang gave King Baishan a sideways glance and said with a cold snort, That's why Tanlang can't live. He must die. You'll have to make the arrangements. I don't have the strength to kill him, so I can't do anything about it. Burrowing deep into the body of one of the dancers, Lu Bang bared his teeth and said, Kill him and seize those Kunwu swords, and I guarantee King Yangqiu will have an 80% chance of ascending the throne. Your Highness, my palace is empty and lonely. Can you give me over 1,000 dancers to fill it up? King Baishan narrowed his eyes and ignored Lu Bang. His eyes flickered with a fierce gleam, and for a moment, no one knew what he was thinking. Chapter 790. With fine wine, beautiful women, and dozens of boxes of precious toys, Lu Bang bade farewell to King Baishan and returned to the Changle Palace he had built in high spirits. He was in a good mood, but when he suddenly saw someone standing in front of the palace gate, Lu Bang's face turned extremely unsightly. It was as if he was a beautiful girl who had stepped into a pile of dog shit when she went out in expensive boots she had just bought. His good mood of the whole day suddenly collapsed, and Lu Bang almost jumped to his feet and cursed. When he saw a forest of fragrant trees 1,000 feet away from the gate of Changle Palace had been cut down, and a large group of craftsmen from the workshops of Great Yu's imperial palace were busy building houses, he even had the urge to pull out a knife and stab someone. While Lu Bang was having fun with King Baishan in King Baishan's mansion and making some secret deals, Wuxia rode on Ao Buzan and entered the city of Liangzhu with Goldhorn, Silverhorn, and the sisters. With the jade medallion given to him by the Yellow Emperor, Wuxia entered Diyu's imperial palace openly and met Emperor Haozuan at the first moment. It was still the same ancient great hall, and Emperor Haozuan was still dressed as before. He sat on the throne, and streams of purple light and starlight poured down from the top of the hall and poured into his body. Emperor Haozuan's aura rolled like a bottomless abyss, enveloping the whole great hall, and even the entire imperial palace of Diyu. Unlike the time when Wuxia was conferred the title of Marquis of East Sea Province, his aura was extremely restrained in front of all the courtiers, making him look harmless. But today, when Wuxia entered the palace alone, the emperor had unleashed his aura. It was as unfathomable as a bottomless abyss, and as overbearing as the blazing sun. Emperor Haozuan sat on the throne, emanating an aura so strong that no one dared to look at him directly. He stood in front of Wuxia like a real sun. Wuxia bowed respectfully to the emperor, and showed him the jade medallion given to him by the Yellow Emperor. Emperor Haozuan nodded slightly and said in a deep voice, The sacred emperor has sent a special emissary to tell me about it. I already know the purpose of your trip. Just do it wholeheartedly, and no one in Yuxiong Plain can stop you. After pondering for a moment, Emperor Haozuan said indifferently, The king of Han, Lu Bang, is the reincarnation of the celestial emperor, the son of the celestial emperor of the celestial court. He is now the celestial emissary of Diyu, and is responsible for coordinating everything between the celestial court and Diyu. It is not good that you hurt him. Wuxia bowed and accepted the order, then put forward a few requests to the emperor. The emperor agreed to Wuqia's request without hesitation. Immediately, thousands of specially made jade medallions representing the eunuchs of Diyu's imperial court were given to Wuxia, and the craftsmen of Diyu's imperial court were sent to build a East Sea mansion for Wuqi in front of Liu Bang's Changel Palace outside Liangzhu. Emperor Haozuan even issued an inexplicable decree. It was said that Tan Lang, the Marquis of East Sea Province, was proficient in the hybridization of rice, so he had specially ordered Tan Lang to station in Liangzhu and teach him the secret technique in the agricultural court to increase the food production of Diyu. It was a decree that puzzled all the civil and military officials of Diyu who heard the details. Hybrid rice? What the hell was that? The agricultural court of Diyu was only responsible for supervising the people of Diyu to sow and harvest on time, as well as managing the granaries of Diyu. Since when did the agricultural court start to play with the technique of technological improvement? The soil on Panga continent was fertile, and the endless natural energy made it fertile for crops that could be harvested several times a year. As long as the people of Diyu were willing to put in the effort and throw all kinds of crop seeds into the fields, they would have a bumper harvest in a month or two. Overall, Diyu's food production was extremely excessive, so it was meaningless to play with hybridization of rice to increase food production. But since Emperor Haozuan had issued the decree, all the civil and military officials could only keep their questions to themselves. In any case, with this decree, he could live openly in Liangzhu and fool around. Although he was a foreign subject, and according to the rules of Diyu, he was not qualified to live in Yuxiong Plain for long. But since Emperor Haozuan had specially ordered him to teach the agricultural court the technique of hybrid rice, he could stay in Liangzhu until those officials learned the technique. As for when those officials would learn the technique, Emperor Haozuan did not know, nor did all the civil and military officials in the court. Even Wuqi himself did not know the exact answer to this question, because Wuqi only knew the term hybrid rice, and he did not know what it was exactly. But since it was just an excuse, Wuqi had provided Emperor Haozuan with an excuse that would make everyone under the heaven vomit blood. After bidding farewell to Emperor Haozuan, Wuqi left the imperial palace of Diyu with thousands of craftsmen, and came excitedly to the beautiful white sand bay outside Liangzhu. Liu Bang did not like the residence of the previous celestial ambassador in Liangzhu, so when he was appointed as the celestial ambassador of the celestial court in Diyu, he immediately chose White Sand Bay, a place with beautiful scenery, to build himself a large Changel palace. In the palace, he kept a large number of beautiful female immortals and cultivators, and tens of thousands of maids at his beck and call. Every day, the air in Changel Palace was filled with the fragrance of wine and meat, singing and dancing, making it one of the most luxurious places in Yuxiong Plain. Because of the frequent appearance of scantily clad female immortals and cultivators near Changel Palace, Emperor Haozuan had even issued a secret decree forbidding the young members of all the noble clans in Liangzhu to come within 100 miles of Changel Palace. Compared with the conservative, closed, old-fashioned, and oppressive Liangzhu, Changel Palace was like a group of eminent monks of the Buddhist League who had been in seclusion for 100 years, with a gorgeously dressed naked woman suddenly inserted into their midst. It was so abrupt and out of place. White Sand Bay was a bay washed out by a tributary of a great river outside Liangzhu. Within hundreds of miles, the bay was filled with white, thumb-sized pieces of supreme-grade jade, which shone brightly under the sun. It was a rare sight outside Liangzhu. Near White Sand Bay, there was a forest of fragrant trees, so thick that it would take a dozen people to wrap their arms around it. This kind of forest was also a rare magical tree, and it was born with a faint fragrance of ambergris, which was the best at repelling mosquitoes and all kinds of poisons. It had taken Liu Bang a lot of thought to choose White Sand Bay to build Changel Palace. Sitting on the tall building of Changel Palace every day, one would feel the refreshing breeze, and see the sky and the water blending into one. The white jade beach and the emerald green fragrant trees complemented each other, and the faint fragrance of the fragrant trees lingered around one's body. There were also countless beautiful women to entertain one's ears and eyes. It was truly a first-class enjoyment in the world. All the palaces and pavilions in Changel Palace were built with the fragrant trees of the fragrant trees. If one stayed in these pavilions for a long time, one would be surrounded by an elegant and lasting fragrance, which could refresh one's mind and heart. It was hard to describe the wonderful effect of this fragrance. Bringing thousands of craftsmen with him, Wuqi went straight to Changel Palace. Regardless of the consequences, He directly ordered them to cut down the thousands of acres of fragrant trees in front of the main entrance of Changle Palace, clearing out a large open space. After that, the craftsmen dug a deep trench around the open space, using the huge fragrant trees they cut down, and planted 3 layers of tall fences. These craftsmen worked in the workshops directly under Du Palace, and each of them had an impressive cultivation base. Not only were they adept at building all kinds of buildings, they also possessed an overall strength no weaker than a first-tier heaven immortal. It was worth noting that all the palaces built by Du Palace were built with huge stones. Without strength, how could these craftsmen move those huge stones that easily weighed millions of kilograms? With such an overall strength, the speed at which these craftsmen built the Marquis Mansion of East Sea Province was incredible. It only took these generals the time it took to finish a pot of tea to build the trench, which was 100 feet wide and 1,000 feet deep, and 10 miles long and wide. Even so, it only took them a quarter of an hour to finish the 3 layers of fences inside and outside the mansion. After that, they temporarily left the various buildings in the mansion, and instead, built 5 3-mile-tall watchtowers in the center and 4 corners of the mansion. It had a base of 36 feet in both width and length, and a height of 3 miles. From such a tall sentry tower, Liu Bang could clearly see every movement of every single person in Changle Palace. Even if Liu Bang moved from one female immortal's room to another female cultivator's room in the middle of the night, as long as he sent a few oracles who practiced various divine abilities to stand on this sentry tower, he would be able to see everything clearly. In fact, with the overall strength of the people around Liu Bang, they could easily cover the entire Changle Palace with all kinds of restrictive spells. But no one could withstand the anger in their hearts. Who would be in a good mood when 5 watchtowers, each 3 miles tall, were erected less than 1,000 feet away from their front door? The sentry tower Wuxia asked these craftsmen to build was ridiculously tall, a 3 miles tall sentry tower. Since Pangu created the world, no matter if it was humans, immortals, demons, fiends, ghosts, or monsters, they had fought in so many wars, and had gone through countless apocalypses, yet such a monstrous thing had never appeared. The 5 watchtowers stood right in front of Changle Palace, each 3 miles tall. Even the craftsmen who built these watchtowers were grinning from ear to ear. Was the Marquis of East Sea trying to make things difficult for Liu Bang on purpose? When Liu Bang returned to Changle Palace with beautiful girls, fine wines, gold, silver, and jewelry, he saw Wuxia standing in front of the gate and grinning at him. Ao Buzan, who was half a foot long, was lying on Wuqi's head, wagging his tail like a shameless snake. On his left shoulder were gold horn and gold feather, and on his right shoulder were silver horn and silver feather. Both pairs of dragon pythons had their tails coiled tightly together, baring their teeth and sticking out their tongues at Liu Bang. Liu Bang rubbed his eyes and stared at Wuxia for a long while, then turned to look at the 5 watchtowers in front of his door. His fair face suddenly turned dark. He dropped a fist-sized red pearl that he was fiddling with, jumped up 30 feet into the air, pointed a finger at Wuxia and growled, "Marquis of East Sea Province, what the hell are you doing in front of Lao Tzu's gate? Is there really such a tall watchtower?" With a smile on his face, Wuxia pulled out Emperor Haozuan's special decree from under his sleeve, and threw it to Liu Bang. Then he bowed to Liu Bang and said, "King of Han, I'll be your neighbor from now on. Please take care of me." Well, a close neighbor is better than a distant relative. It's fate that we live so close to each other. We must visit each other more often in the future. Liu Bang grabbed Emperor Haozuan's special decree and read it for a long time, then turned to look at Zhang Liang, Han Xian, Xiao He, and Fan Kuai behind him in confusion and asked, "Hybrid rice? What the hell is that? Ugh, is you short of food lately? Doesn't you have countless grains that rot and turn into firewood every year? Why does it need to increase its food production?" Zhang Liang, Han Xian, Xiao He, and Fan Kuai stared blankly at Liu Bang, then turned to look at Wuxia together. Wuqi's smile was so bright and enthusiastic that it made Zhang Liang and the others feel a chill run down their spines. Chapter 791. A gentle breeze blew into the luxurious pavilion, along with the water vapor from the distant river. The cool breeze woke up Liu Bang, who was leaning against a pile of beautiful embroidery. Habitually, Lu Bang slapped the plump buttocks of the female immortal next to him, turned over, and was about to have a good taste of the delicate body of the female immortal. Suddenly he thought of something, and got up from the bed. Gnashing his teeth, he pushed open the half-closed window. Under the green moonlight, 5 pitch-black watchtowers appeared in front of Lu Bang's eyes. How am I supposed to live like this? Lu Bang stared blankly at the towering watchtowers, and suddenly had an impulse to order Han Xian and his men to rush into the prefecture of East Sea and kill every single member of Wuxi's clan. The Cloud Dragon Pavilion, where Lu Bang lived, was the tallest building in Chang'e Palace, but it was only 1,000 feet tall. Where was the watchtower built by Wuxi? A 3-mile-tall watchtower was 4,500 feet tall, 4.5 times taller than Lu Bang's Cloud Dragon Pavilion. Lu Bang had to raise his head with great effort to see the highest point of the watchtower. At the highest point of the watchtower was a stone pillar about 100 feet tall, with a sunken brazier placed right in the middle of it, from which a green flame rose into the sky. Because of the height, the green flame illuminated the area within a radius of 100 miles. Under the illumination of the green flame, the Chang'e Palace, which was once a splendid and magnificent residence of an immortal, looked as creepy and horrible as the underworld. The guards patrolling the streets of Chang'e Palace were like the shadows of ghosts. A few soldiers from the prefecture of East Sea were poking half of their bodies out from the top of the watchtower, looking into Chang'e Palace without any scruples. They were looking down at Chang'e Palace from above, and could easily see everything that was happening in the palace, including the routes of those patrolling guards, as well as every move made by Lu Bang, who had opened the window and was looking at them. I can't live like this anymore. Lu Bang was so angry that his nose became crooked. The 3-mile-tall watchtower was right in front of Chang'e Palace. This was a blatant provocation, a blatant insult to their doorstep. Who was Lu Bang? Even in the celestial court, he was an important figure with great power. Who dared to do such a thing in front of his doorstep? These 5 watchtowers were so annoying. They were trying to teach Lu Bang a lesson. Because of these 5 watchtowers, Lu Bang did not even bother to have fun with the female immortal beside him last night. He angrily adjusted his breathing and fell asleep. Even so, Lu Bang, who usually had a good night's sleep as long as his aura was stable and he never dreamed, was having a nightmare because of the vibration of his immortal soul. In his dream, 5 black watchtowers were falling down on his head. In addition to the 5 ridiculously tall watchtowers, the other buildings in the East Seas Prefecture were also extremely bizarre. They were not a mansion, but a large military camp. In the center of the mansion was an arched hall shaped like a Mongolian yurt, surrounded by 2,000 wooden huts that looked like matchboxes. In each hut, 10 soldiers were stationed by Chi-Chi, all burly men. There was not even a maid in the whole mansion. In the center of the mansion was an arched hall that looked like a Mongolian yurt, surrounded by 2,000 wooden huts that looked like matchboxes. In each hut, 10 soldiers were stationed by Chi-Chi, all burly men. There was not even a maid in the whole mansion. This was a military camp that blocked the entrance to Chang'e Palace. And it was built by the craftsmen from the workshops of Diyu's imperial palace. If it had not been built by these craftsmen, which more or less represented Emperor Haozuan's will, Lu Bang would have sent his men to cause trouble for Wuqi. For example, the 5 ridiculously tall watchtowers should have collapsed by now because of some accident. What is Tanlang doing? Does he want revenge on me? Hehem. Lu Bang shook his head. He did not think that Wuqi was qualified to cause him trouble. So, does this represent Emperor Haozuan's will? Or even that old fellow on Xianyuan Peak? TSK, what did they find? Lu Bang frowned thoughtfully. With his hands clasped behind his back, he looked down at the lush green prefecture of East Sea and fell into deep thought. As the moon moved westward, a red glow spread out in the east, and before long, half of the sky was covered with the red glow of dawn. The red glow dispelled the gloomy and evil aura brought by the green flames in the 5 watchtowers, and it made Lu Bang feel much better. He looked mockingly at the East Sea, sneered, and shook his head. It's too late. Even if you have found some clues, so what? It's too late, really too late. Ants like you will eventually surrender to me. Diyu does not need to exist any longer. Lu Bang smiled proudly. Suddenly, he felt a burning sensation in his lower abdomen. He walked excitedly back to his bed, grabbed a female immortal, and was about to enjoy her. Suddenly, a loud rumble rang out like a clap of thunder. The door of Changle Palace, tens of feet tall and 2 feet thick, made of pure gold, was knocked on. Amidst the loud and sonorous knocking, Wuqi's thunderous voice rang through the whole palace. "Wake up, King of Han Lu Bang. The little marquis has come to visit." Lu Bang, who was in high spirits just a moment ago, suddenly felt weak. Blankly, he held the female immortal in his arms and almost cursed out loud. "Come to visit? Who comes to visit so early in the morning?" The moon was still hanging over the mountains in the west, and the sun had not yet risen in the east. Lu Bang was still naked, and he had not even brushed his teeth. Who comes to visit at this time? Outside Changle Palace, Wuqi, who was clad in a long burlap robe and a pair of straw slippers, his hair disheveled and his clothes disheveled, had a toothpick dangling between his lips and a lazy smile on his face, which was no different from a scoundrel on the streets. Laughing merrily, he kept punching the front door of Changle Palace. His fists were hard and powerful. Sparks flew in all directions from the door forged of pure gold, and every punch left a deep mark on the door. The few celestial soldiers and generals standing guard at the entrance of Changle Palace wanted to cry, but had no tears to shed as they watched Wuqi destroy the door to his heart's content. The door was entirely made of gold, inlaid with countless pearls and jades, and carved with countless patterns of rare flowers and plants. It was more like a rare work of art than a door. Again and again, Wuqi punched the palace gate, turning it into a pockmarked mess. They had to bear the full responsibility for this. But the celestial soldiers and generals guarding the door could not move at all. Laughing merrily, Huang Liang came before them with a group of ferocious soldiers. With a dozen men serving each of them, they locked all the joints of the celestial soldiers and generals, suppressing them completely. Because Princess Zhonglu had held a few blood sacrifices in a row, the cultivation base of a group of soldiers from East Sea Province had skyrocketed. Now they were all lower-tier heaven immortals, or 30th-tier heaven immortals. On top of that, the cultivation techniques of the human race were specifically used to strengthen their fleshly bodies. So every human soldier who had attained a certain level of cultivation base had a mighty strength that could move mountains and drain seas. Although these celestial soldiers and generals also had the cultivation base of heaven immortals, they paid more attention to the transformation of their divine abilities. As a result, the combined strength of their fleshly bodies was not enough to tear apart an army of soldiers from East Sea Province. But now they were being suppressed by a dozen soldiers from East Sea Province. Even if they did have some divine abilities, how could they use them? Wuqi's behavior could only be described as extremely vile when he came to visit someone early in the morning with a group of soldiers, and smashed the door. But, in Wuqi's opinion, he was already very gentle. If it were not for the fact that he had not figured out Lu Bang's trump card and Lu Bang's real strength, he would have thought of assassinating Lu Bang from behind. Wuqi was also very interested in the sky-veiling flag of origin in Lu Bang's hand. Now that he had the thought of killing Wuqi and seizing the treasure, it was not a big deal for him to bring a group of people to make a scene early in the morning. Wuqi was shouting and yelling for Lu Bang to come out and receive the guests. His voice was full of energy, and his roars sounded like the rumbling of a cannon, shaking the ground of Changle Palace. Not long after, the dilapidated palace gates parted to the left and right, and a livid Han Xian rushed out with a large group of celestial soldiers and generals. Glaring at Wuqi, Han Xian snapped, "How dare you? This is the temporary imperial residence of the King of Han. Who dares to make a scene here?" Glancing at Wuqi with his sharp eyes, Han Xian turned angrily to the dozens of celestial soldiers and generals pressed against the palace wall by Huang Liang and his men. Gritting his teeth, he growled through gritted teeth, "Marquis of Donghai Province, do you think you've come to my door to fight?" Wuqi gave Han Xian a surprised look. He waved his hand, and a few soldiers came up with a large pile of game. "Why do you say that, Your Excellency?" asked Wuqi in surprise. "I've hunted a lot of good stuff in the middle of the night, and considering that the King of Han is my neighbor, I've come here to deliver the game. Why do you say that I'm here to fight? Well, may I ask your name?" Going out to hunt in the middle of the night, And delivering the game early in the morning? Killing intent surged in Han Xian's eyes as he fought back the urge to stab Wuqi in the face. Staring fixedly at Wuqi, he snorted coldly and said, "I am Han Xian." "Oh," Wuqi answered indifferently. Then he put one hand on Han Xian's chest and pushed him back. "Han Xian? I've never heard of you. You're just a nobody. Well, I'm here to see your master. Can you please not stand in my way?" The power contained in his palm exploded like a bolt of lightning. Han Xian's bones let out a series of creaking noise, as the tremendous power nearly shattered all his bones. Wu Qi's cultivation base had now reached the level of a second-tier gold immortal. As he continued to fuse with the skeleton of the ancient immortal and absorb half of Buddhafuta's Buddhist power, his overall strength was advancing by leaps and bounds every day. Obviously, Han Xian's cultivation base was not as strong as Wu Qi's, and Han Xian did not pay much attention to the cultivation of his fleshly body. Although Wu Qi's palm seemed to have pressed down lightly, it was actually filled with a surging force that could shatter an ordinary planet. Fortunately, when Han Xian saw that the situation was not good, he immediately stepped back. A red light filled with killing intent flashed rapidly across the surface of his body. Loud popping noises kept ringing out as he gradually wore down the tremendous force that Wu Qi had thrust into his body, turning it into layer after layer of fierce sword energy that shot out from all over his body. As the sword energy whistled through the air, the group of celestial soldiers and heavenly generals behind Han Xian was thrown into disarray by the sudden attack. Dozens of soldiers who bore the brunt of the attack had their armor shattered, causing them to fly backward while coughing up blood. A few unlucky ones had their bodies ripped apart by the sword energy, sending broken limbs flying in all directions. For a moment it was a mess in front of Changel Palace. Wu Qi cried out in a fuss, "Han Xian, how could you do this to your own men? Is it fun to kill people so early in the morning?" Han Xian, who was nearly killed by Wu Qi's palm, was so angry that he coughed up blood. He glared at Wu Qi, but he had no time to refute Wu Qi's words. All he could think of was to force out the tremendous force that Wu Qi had thrust into his body. Just then Lu Bang's voice came from afar. "Please forgive me for not going out to greet you, honorable guests. He, Marquis of East Sea Province, you seem to be in a good mood. Please come in, come in, come in, come in." Wu Qi laughed and swaggered into Changel Palace with Huang Liang and the others. Chapter 792. In Changel Palace, next to the Cloud Dragon Pavilion, there was a high platform made entirely of green jade. The green jade was carefully selected, and had the same color and luster as the sky. The tall platform was carved with countless patterns of wind and clouds, and hundreds of huge dragons were flying in and out of the clouds, making the jade platform look as if it were about to fly straight into the sky. Qingming platform was the place where Lu Bang usually feasted and had fun. The morning sun shone brightly on the Qingming platform. A bonfire was burning in the middle of the platform, and a tiger, which had been cleaned and skinned, was placed on a wooden frame. Yellow fat was constantly seeping out of the tiger's body, dripping into the bonfire and making popping noises. Next to the bonfire, a chef was carefully preparing a fat tiger penis. A strange aroma slowly drifted out from the small pot in front of him, making people salivate and want to eat it. Sitting behind a jade table, Wu Qi squinted at the chef for a while, then nodded to Lu Bang with a smile and said, "King of Han, you are enjoying yourself." Lu Bang sat opposite Wu Qi with a smile on his face. He was surrounded by dozens of beautiful fairies, and he was holding a petite fairy with both hands, rubbing and groping her in his arms. Upon hearing Wu Qi's words, Lu Bang smiled proudly and said, "I have no great ambition in my life. I just like good wine and beautiful women, and I just want to live a free and unfettered life." A female immortal picked up a red fruit and fed it into Lu Bang's mouth. Lu Bang chewed a few times, then smacked his lips, shook his head, smiled at Wu Qi and said, "That's why I begged the great celestial emperor to send me to Daiyu. If nothing unexpected happens, I'll stay in Daiyu and never leave Liangzhu. All the beautiful women in Liangzhu are waiting for me to dote on them." Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and smiled. Did Lu Bang just say that he is a man with no great ambition? His words were as fake as they could be. If it were other ministers of Deyu, they might have been fooled by Liu Bang, but Wu Qi knew what kind of person he was. Not to mention Liu Bang. How could Zhang Liang, Han Xian and Xiao He, who were sitting next to him, willingly submit to a man with no great ambition? Especially that eagle-eyed Han Xian, who was definitely not a peaceful man. As for Fan Kuai, who stood behind Liu Bang, he was staring at Wu Qi with his teeth clenched, as if he could not wait to rush up and tear Wu Qi to pieces. It was too hypocritical to say that he had no great ambition in his life when he had so many brave men serving him. Although Liu Bang wanted to play tricks, Wu Qi did not want to waste time with him. He knew very well that he was no match for Liu Bang if he played tricks. So when fighting with such an old fox, it was better to go straight to the point and use the most direct and violent means, which was definitely more effective than beating around the bush and playing tricks. Picking up the large bronze wine vessel and taking a sip, Wu Qi stared at Liu Bang and said with a sneer, "The sacred emperor has given me 108 kunwa swords and asked me to come to Liangzhu and keep an eye on King of Han's every move. May I ask King of Han, the Celestial Court, the Buddhist League, the 13 great heavenly ghost kings of the ghost realm, or any other people, what are your conspiracies? Please tell me frankly, King of Han, so that I can complete the task assigned by the sacred emperor." Liu Bang was stunned, and so were Zhang Liang, Xiao He, Han Xian and the others. All of them stared at Wu Qi as if they were looking at a ghost. After staring at Wu Qi for a long time, Liu Bang suddenly laughed and said, "I, Liu Bang, don't understand what you're saying, Marquis of Yi Province." Wu Qi slapped the vessel with his palm, shattering it into countless specks of dust that drifted in the air. He straightened his back, put his hands on the jade table, and stared at Liu Bang as he said, word by word, "What are you trying to do? Destroy Deyu? Assassinate the sacred emperor Xian Yuan? Seize the right to rule Pangu continent? Please tell me frankly, King of Han. Otherwise, don't blame Wu Qi for pestering you and making it impossible for you to get out of Changle Palace." Grinning coldly, Wu Qi pointed at his nose with his thumb and said, "Remember, my real name is Wu Qi. The name Tanlang is the name of your master, Wu Qi." Liu Bang coughed dryly and interrupted Wu Qi. "It doesn't matter what your name is, Marquis of East Sea Province. You can call me kitty or puppy, or even dog dung or cow dung. I don't understand what you're saying, Marquis of East Sea Province. Somebody see our guest out." Han Xian rose to his feet slowly. His whole body was surging with killing intent, and there were 3 stars shooting out of his eyes. He made no secret of his malice against Wu Qi, and his surging killing intent turned into invisible blades that locked onto Wu Qi's body from all directions. As soon as Liu Bang gave the order, Han Xian would not mind attacking and killing Wu Qi with his strongest means. With a cold snort, 108 green swords suddenly appeared around Wu Qi. Emanating a fierce aura, the Kunwu sword spun slowly according to some indescribable law of heaven and earth. He sneered in a low voice and said, "Oh, see our guest out? It's a pity that I, an unwelcome guest, don't want to leave. Give me an answer or I'll seal off Changle Palace with fiend-slaying sword formation, preventing you from entering or leaving." Liu Bang's face turned livid with anger. He slapped the jade table and rose to his feet, pointing a finger at Wu Qi and snapped, "Do you think the fiend-slaying sword formation can decide everything? Marquis of East Sea Province, you've underestimated me too much." Wu Qi's answer was straightforward. With a casual point of his finger, a beam of green sword energy shot out whistling through the air. The translucent, glass-like sword energy was surrounded by dozens of huge thunderbolts. It was a fiend-slaying sword energy fused with the profound meaning of heavenly thunder. Not only was it extremely sharp, but it also contained the pure and fierce power of heavenly thunder. Its lethality was at least 10 times greater than that of pure sword energy, or heavenly thunder. Fan Kuai, who had quietly leaped out from behind Liu Bang with a spear and a thick shield and was lunging at Wu Qi, became the first target of the sword energy. Fan Kuai, who wanted to launch a sneak attack on Wu Qi, never dreamed that Wu Qi would discover his movements as soon as he rushed out. With a thunderous rumble, the sword energy thrust at his face. Fan Kuai had no choice but to raise the 1-foot-thick shield in his right hand to block it. A deafening rumble rang out, and the blinding light of the thunderbolt stung everyone's eyes. Suddenly, the hair of everyone on the Cyan Netherworld platform stood on end, accompanied by countless electric sparks. Fan Kuai grunted and staggered back dozens of steps, nearly falling off the Cyan Netherworld platform. His shield, a superior-grade gold immortal artifact meticulously forged by an immortal craftsman of the Celestial Court, was cracked open. The defensive treasure was pierced by Wuqi's sword energy. Fan Kuai's right arm went numb, and he could not lift it for a long time. He looked down at the shield, which was now mostly broken, and angrily dropped it. Then he looked up at Wuqi and was about to throw the spear in his left hand at Wuqi. Wuqi sneered. A plume of black smoke rushed out of the top of his head, amidst which was the dark celestial tower. A vast amount of starlight poured out of the tower, turned into wisps of silver rain, and poured into the hovering Kunwu swords. After absorbing the power of the starlight, the cyan and transparent Kunwu swords gradually turned silvery white, with the shadows of countless stars of various sizes appearing on its blade. Lu Bang's face flickered, and he snapped in a low voice. Fan Kuai, who was ready to strike, roared angrily and strode to Lu Bang's side, snorted and glared at him, then tilted his body sideways and sulked. He hated Wuqi very much, but since Lu Bang had given the order, he dared not attack Wuqi again. Lu Bang sighed softly. He bowed his head and pondered for a moment, then shook his head and said, "Marquis threat has hit my soft spot. If you seal off the Changle Palace, there's nothing I can do. Hee, I can't break the fiend-slaying sword formation." Lightly tapping his finger on the jade table, Lu Bang asked indifferently, "Do you know how many resources an immortal consumes in his cultivation, Marquis?" Wuqi was taken aback by the question. He frowned and pondered for a while, then shook his head. Wuqi had never calculated how many resources an immortal consumes in his cultivation, but he reckoned it would not be a small number. Lu Bang smiled, counted with his fingers and told the story. For a mortal to cultivate to the Xiantian realm, he would probably need the resources produced in a mountain hundreds of miles in circumference. Herbs, natural energy, and all kinds of other things. A mountain hundreds of miles in circumference that was not considered barren was enough for a mortal to cultivate to the Xiantian realm. If a Xiantian warrior wanted to condense the Jin Dan, unless he was a brilliant genius, he would need the resources of a land thousands of miles in circumference. As long as there was a small energy vein within 1,000 miles to supply him with natural energy and some energy stones to mine, it would be easy for him to condense the Jin Dan. If a Jin Dan cultivator wanted to form his nascent soul, he would need the resources of a land 10,000 miles in circumference. All kinds of herbs, flying swords, and magical treasures. The herbs and minerals produced in a land 10,000 miles in circumference might not be enough. If there were not enough mineral veins in the area, the cultivator would have to find ways to find the resources he needed elsewhere. When a cultivator stepped into the nascent divinity realm, he would need even more resources to improve his cultivation base. He would have to take a certain amount of spirit pills every month, and he would have to consume energy stones every day. On top of that, he would need defensive magical treasures, flying swords to kill enemies, talismans, seals, and all kinds of strange things for his cultivation. Without a few energy veins within 100,000 miles of circumference, a nascent divinity cultivator could exhaust all the natural energy in the air with just one breath. As for heaven immortals, the resources consumed would have to be calculated in terms of planets. For example, the heaven immortals at the bottom of the 36th tier had to use spirit herbs that were thousands of years old to concoct the heaven immortal pills they needed, and a planet with ordinary natural energy might not produce many spirit herbs that were thousands of years old. On the other hand, heaven immortals consumed a lot of natural energy. One breath of theirs might consume the total amount of natural energy that an ordinary nascent divinity cultivator would consume in a few days. Therefore, a planet with ordinary natural energy and resources could at most provide 3 to 5 low-tier heaven immortals and their disciples for their cultivation. This was the reason why there was usually only one nascent soul cultivator in an outer heavenly realm on a planet with ordinary natural energy. 3 to 5 low-tier heaven immortals, 20 to 30 nascent divinity cultivators, nearly 100 nascent soul cultivators, and hundreds of Jin Dan disciples. This was the maximum number of immortals and cultivators a planet could support. If there were more, the planet would be drained of all its energy veins, turning it into a dead planet in the future. Wuxia nodded silently. What Lu Bang said was true. For example, when he was in the minor heavenly circle realm, whether it was the White Cloud Immortal sect or the Tranquil Vimla sect, both had 3 ancestral masters of heaven immortal realm leading their disciples to occupy a planet for their own cultivation, while some itinerant immortals occupied a planet with thin natural energy to cultivate alone. It was not that those itinerant immortals did not want to recruit disciples and establish their own sects, but that their territories could not support too many cultivators. Seeing Wuxia nod, Lu Bang counted on his fingers and said the following. Chapter 793. Lu Bang took a big gulp of wine and continued his story. The 36 tiers of heaven immortals were roughly divided into 4 ranks, with each 9 tiers forming a rank. Lower tier heaven immortals, mid-tier heaven immortals, upper tier heaven immortals, and top tier heaven immortals. A standard planet in outer heavenly realms, where energy veins and energy were the most common, could accommodate 3 to 5 lower tier heaven immortals for their cultivation base to grow steadily. But when it came to mid-tier heaven immortals, they would need all the energy and resources of a standard planet to make their cultivation base grow steadily. As for upper-tier heaven immortals, they would need more than 10 standard planets worth of energy and resources to raise their cultivation base to the level of upper-tier heaven immortals. Moreover, upper-tier heaven immortals required a lot of rare materials to forge, and upper-tier heaven immortal pills that could work for upper-tier heaven immortals required spirit herbs that were tens of thousands of years old to concoct. Spirit herbs that were tens of thousands of years old were extremely rare, so how could they be bred in an ordinary environment? As for top-tier heaven immortals, they needed the energy and resources of 1,000 standard planets. Sometimes, in order to craft a handy natal immortal artifact, a top-tier heaven immortal would even need to excavate all the mineral veins of dozens of planets to extract the rare materials he needed. In outer heavenly realms, it was common for top-tier heaven immortals to use middle-tier immortal artifacts, just like those itinerant cultivators Wuxia met on Myriad Immortals' planet. They were all so poor that some of them could not even afford a decent immortal artifact. Heaven immortals were not a big deal, but when it came to the realm of gold immortals, it was even more terrifying. The 18 tiers of gold immortals were still divided into 4 ranks. First, second, and third tier gold immortals were known as top-tier gold immortals, while the other 15 tiers were divided into lower tier, mid-tier, and upper tier gold immortals. If a lower tier gold immortal could find an excellent immortal vein to build a cave abode, the energy he needed for his daily cultivation would not be a problem. But for a lower tier gold immortal to take a gold immortal pill and forge a gold immortal artifact, he would need to consume an astronomical amount of materials, which could not be provided by a single planet. For lower tier gold immortals, the materials they needed must be provided by tens of thousands of planets in a galaxy. Therefore, few gold immortals in outer heavenly realms were itinerant cultivators. Most of them had established their own sects and ruled over different places. Relying on their many disciples, these gold immortals controlled one or more planets, plundering the resources they needed for their cultivation. Top-tier gold immortals were even more terrifying. Take the Dark Een True Water Palace, where Lady Dark Goldwater was born, for example. The palace master of Dark Een True Water Palace, Lady Divine Water, was a veteran first-tier gold immortal, and was only one step away from the realm of primordial. The direct sphere of influence of Dark Een True Water Palace covered more than 10,000 heavenly realms, and hundreds of thousands of planets were directly under its control. Lady Divine Water was also conferred by the Celestial Court to govern the surrounding 100,000 heavenly realms. All the sects and itinerant cultivators in these 100,000 heavenly realms had to pay tribute to the Dark Een True Water Palace according to the seasons. In addition to Lady Divine Water, there were 18 other golden immortals in the Mystic Een True Water Palace. It could be said that the Mystic Een True Water Palace's 19 gold immortals were created by relying on the resources of these 100,000 heavenly realms. Without the resources of these 100,000 heavenly realms, Lady Divine Water's cultivation base would be at most a third-tier gold immortal. and the number of gold immortals in Dark Een True Water Palace would at least be halved. As for those almighty experts of the realm of primordial, they enjoyed the offerings of the celestial court and the many sects they founded. Which primordial expert did not have 8 or 10 personal disciples who were as strong as gold immortals? Who did not have 100 or 80 nominal disciples who were as strong as gold immortals? These personal disciples and nominal disciples recruited as many disciples as they could in outer heavenly realms, and at least half of the resources they plundered were given to their masters. The immortal officials of the celestial court, which nominally controlled countless outer heavenly realms, were notorious for their arrogance. Every day, they plundered lands and collected various resources to offer to the celestial court, while the celestial court had to provide most of the resources to the primordial experts and the gold immortals and heaven immortals who served the celestial court. Otherwise, who would obey the celestial court's orders? Everyone was desperately plundering resources for cultivation, but the total amount of resources was limited, while the number of immortals was constantly increasing. Even the immortals themselves were getting married and having children, not to mention those mortals with superior aptitudes who had joined the immortal sections. Even though it was harder for immortals with higher cultivation bases to have children, immortals had an endless lifespan. As long as they were determined, an immortal couple could have children of their own after spending tens of thousands of years, or even hundreds of thousands of years. Immortals gave birth to children, and their children gave birth to children, and their children and grandchildren multiplied and grew stronger. Mortals did not have a lifespan of more than 100 years, and they would die after their children were born. But immortals would not die unless they encountered a catastrophe. Therefore, as the number of immortals increased and the number of high-level immortals increased, the demand for rare materials of all kinds also increased. Immortals were a group of people who had the strongest desire for time. They pursued immortality, great power and powerful immortal items and magical treasures. With bloodshot eyes, every immortal improved their cultivation bases and realms, and desperately gathered materials to forge a powerful immortal item for themselves. With a powerful celestial artifact and power, they would be able to occupy even more cultivation resources, thus allowing them to possess even stronger power and celestial artifacts. From then on, a vicious cycle would be formed. Wuxia looked at Lu Bang and said with a sneer, "You know this is a vicious cycle too?" Lu Bang gave Wuxia a look and said, "Let me finish." There were many immortals but few resources, so they naturally had to fight for resources. Low-grade heaven immortals would risk their lives for a certain blessed land. Middle-grade and upper-grade heaven immortals would risk their lives for the control of one or a few planets, and top-grade heaven immortals would risk their lives for upper-grade planets that were rich in natural resources and natural resources. Gold immortals, on the other hand, worked hard to improve their cultivation bases, strategized for territories, and tried to seek refuge under primordial experts, or worked hard to get a good position in the celestial court. The end of the competition was killing. Gold immortals killed gold immortals, heaven immortals killed heaven immortals, gold immortals killed heaven immortals, and heaven immortals killed ordinary cultivators. Every day, tens of thousands of cultivators in outer heavenly realms transcended heavenly tribulations and became heaven immortals, and countless immortals died in all kinds of competitions. Whether it was for a spirit herb, an ore, or something else, countless immortals would draw their swords at the slightest disagreement. Sometimes, for the sake of a medicinal herb that was less than 10,000 years old, the gold core disciples of two sects would get involved, and then the elders of their sects would get involved. In the end, for the sake of an ordinary medicinal herb that was less than 10,000 years old, a war between two gold immortals would break out. On average, a number of heaven immortals died every day, and a number of gold immortals died every year. When these mighty gold immortals and heaven immortals perished, their resentment would linger in the world, unable to transcend. When several eons had passed, the resentment of countless immortals would gather together, causing the heaven secret to give birth to a killing intent that could destroy the world. It was the so-called apocalypse of heaven and earth. When an apocalypse came, even primordial experts would become weaker than pigs and dogs. Since the establishment of the heaven, the current Great Celestial Emperor was already the 3758th Great Celestial Emperor. All the previous great celestial emperors had fallen, and none of them were spared. This showed how terrifying the apocalypse of heaven and earth was. Even the current Lord Buddha, Amitabha, was the 2435th Lord Buddha of the Buddhist League, and all the previous Lord Buddhas had turned into ashes. If a mortal was lucky enough to cultivate to become a heaven immortal, it would only take him 1,000 years. If a heaven immortal could raise his cultivation base by 1 tier, if he had a good aptitude, good luck, a decent cultivation technique, and did not lack too many cultivation resources, it would take him about 10,000 years to raise his cultivation base by 1 tier. Even if a 2nd-tier heaven immortal were to break through to the 1st tier, as long as he had enough resources and good cultivation techniques, it would take him 20 to 30,000 years at most. But it would take several to dozens of periods for a heaven immortal to break through to the gold immortal realm. After becoming a gold immortal, it would take eons of time to break through to the next tier. A gold immortal needed not only powerful magic power, but also a powerful gold immortal artifact to resist the gold immortal thunder tribulation. Therefore, when one reached the gold immortal realm, just collecting materials to forge a gold immortal artifact was a long and arduous task. As for gold immortals becoming primordial experts, well, the latest primordial experts in the 9 heavens had broken through 50 periods ago, and it had been 1,000 periods since a new primordial expert had appeared. On average, with so many immortals in the outer heavenly realms, there would only be one new primordial immortal every 100 million years. But every time an apocalypse came, hundreds of primordial immortals would fall. Not to mention those gold immortals, heaven immortals, and ordinary cultivators, who were no stronger than ants in the eyes of primordial immortals. Every time an apocalypse came, the number of immortals and cultivators who fell was 100 times more than the number of stars in the sky. When the apocalypse of heaven and earth came, all immortals would be plagued by evil karma. For no reason, they would be involved in countless battles. Even if they cultivated in seclusion, they would still be attacked by others for no reason. All kinds of strange karmic entanglements forced all immortals to fight and kill all those who fought with them. Blood would flow like rivers, and corpses would pile up like mountains. This was the apocalypse of heaven and earth that terrified immortals. Sometimes, when the apocalypse was extremely severe, masters would even kill their disciples, sons would kill their fathers, and husband and wife would kill each other. As a fallen primordial immortal of the Fiend League had roared before his death, there was nothing in the world that could not be killed, and only by killing all living beings in the world could one safely transcend the tribulation. As Wuxia listened to Lu Bang's indifferent narration, he felt waves of numbness all over his body. Was this the apocalypse of heaven and earth? Was this the apocalypse that those lofty immortals had to face every once in a while? Perhaps for mortals, the apocalypse of heaven and earth that came every few dozens, or even dozens of eons was illusory, but for immortals who had an infinite lifespan, it was a real threat. Especially for those primordial immortals who had to spend an entire eons in a secluded cultivation, the apocalypse of heaven and earth was like a sharp knife pressed against their chests, making them restless. Taking a deep breath, Wuxia asked Lu Bang, "What is King of Han trying to say by saying all this?" Lu Bang gave Wuxia a look, and began to speak unhurriedly. Chapter 794. Lu Bang rose to his feet, clasped his hands behind his back, and looked at Wuxia with a solemn expression. "What we are doing is to completely eliminate the apocalypse of heaven and earth. From now on, the world will be peaceful, and there will be no more conflicts between the heavens and earth." When Lu Bang said this, the morning sun was right behind his head. The bright red sun wrapped around his head like a halo of Buddha's light, adding a touch of sacredness and majesty to him out of nowhere. In particular, his tone was exceptionally solemn, exceptionally earnest, and had a powerful persuasiveness. But Wuxia did not believe Lu Bang at all. Completely eliminate the apocalypse of heaven and earth? According to what Lu Bang had just said, in order to stop the immortals from fighting for cultivation resources, they had to be given enough resources. A group of mice could fight each other to the death for a few peanuts, but if they were thrown into a barn full of rice, would they still think about those peanuts? A barn full of rice? Wuxia sprang to his feet and glanced around. Purple mist was rising from the vast land of Yuxiong Plain, and the endless Pangu sacred energy and natural energy filled the void. The ordinary trees near Liangzhu were filled with extremely strong natural energy, and the sap that sprayed out from a random tree trunk was a supreme-grade material for alchemy. Even a handful of sand here was made of supreme-grade jade and gemstones, and the natural energy contained in a stone was several times more than that of an upper-grade immortal stone. Pangu continent was a huge barn of rice, and it was constantly absorbing the chaotic energy from the primal chaos to expand its area. There were countless innate treasures in the newly sprouted wilderness on the outskirts of Pangu continent. If Du had not heavily guarded the vital areas and strictly controlled the passages through which immortals could enter and leave Pangu continent, the immortals from the outer heavenly realms would have long swarmed to Pangu continent and settled down there. In theory, Pangu continent, a fertile land that could grow on its own without limit, could definitely accommodate all the immortals of today. Wuqi stared at Lu Bang and said, "The Celestial Court wants to control Pangu continent?" When the Celestial Court was established, the ancient saints set the heavenly rule that the human race was in charge of the land, and the Celestial Court was in charge of the heaven. Does the Celestial Court want to hold both heaven and earth in their hands? Lu Bang looked at Wuqi with a smile, then shook his head and said, "The Celestial Court does not have such great ambition, absolutely not. In the future, the Celestial Court will only be in charge of the immortals. Pangu continent is still the territory of the human race. No immortal under the jurisdiction of the heaven will violate the rules and enter Pangu continent. Absolutely not. Absolutely not." Lu Bang's smile was very mysterious. Looking at Lu Bang's smile, Wuqi's mind was racing with countless thoughts. Perhaps it was because of the enormous willpower of Buddha Futu, but Wuqi's divine soul had been growing rapidly these days, and his wisdom had been greatly improved. There were many wise people among the eminent monks of the Buddhist League, which had something to do with the characteristics of the Buddhist League's cultivation techniques. Now that Wuqi was about to form his natal relic, his wisdom was at least 100 times higher than it was a few months ago. In just a few breaths of time, Wuqi came up with a possibility. He looked at Lu Bang with a cold smile and said, "The immortals of the Celestial Court will naturally not enter Pangu continent. But if the humans controlled by the Celestial Court build other kingdoms on Pangu continent, all the resources in the territories they conquer will belong to the Celestial Court, right?" The faces of Lu Bang and the others turned dark. Any immortal sect in outer heavenly realms can control hundreds of millions, or even billions of mortals to build their own kingdoms on Pangu continent, said Wuqi. They can enjoy the offerings of herbs, energy stones, and ores mined by these mortals without having to come to Pangu continent in person. The mortal kingdoms built by powerful immortal sects will be stronger, and naturally, they will get more resources. Am I right? Lu Bang opened his mouth, but could not say a word for a long time. Wuqi narrowed his eyes and pondered for a while, then nodded and said with a smile, "Du is an iron plate, so it's hard for you to take advantage of Du. The reason you're working with King Zhangqiu and even his father is to destroy Du's national strength. Of course, that's not enough." After a moment of silence, Wuqi continued, "The best choice is to migrate the mortals on those planets in outer heavenly realms to Pangu continent. But Great You will definitely not accept those mortals. So, you have to find an excuse that Great You has no choice but to let you do whatever you want, and then send those mortals to Pangu continent. How do you do it?" Han Xian slowly approached Wuqi, his body surging with killing intent and his eyes bloodshot. Xiaohe's eyes shone with a strange gleam as he fixed them on Wuqi's body. Under Xiaohe's gaze, the space around Wuqi froze, and even the flow of time gradually slowed down. As for Zhongliang, he slowly took out a brush and a book, then slowly drew faint lines of ink in the air. As the tip of the brush streaked across the air, the sunlight in the surroundings turned into bright rays and gradually gathered at the tip of the brush. Gradually, the light in the surroundings dimmed, and only the brush in Zhongliang's hand was glowing so brightly that no one could look at it directly. Just as the crowd was about to beat Wuqi up, a long, sonorous cry suddenly came from outside Changle Palace. "Marquis of Isi Province, I'm here as a guest. Why are you still making noise in that fellow's house?" As the cry rang out, Gao flew straight toward them, stepping on a dark cloud. He was followed by hundreds of generals in bright armor, all of whom had the cultivation base of second Pangu heaven or above. Lu Bang's face flickered slightly, and he suddenly burst out laughing. "What are you doing? What are you doing? Marquis of East Sea Province is a guest. Why are you making it so tense?" After shouting at Han Xian and the others to leave, Lu Bang lowered his voice and said hurriedly to Wuqi, "So what if you've guessed our plan? You can't stop us now. I've said so much today, and I'm not afraid that you'll know what we're going to do." Grinning coldly, Lu Bang gritted his teeth and said, "The reason why the human race can monopolize the fortune of heaven and earth is nothing more than Panga's legacy. Half of the human bloodline comes from Panga's blood essence. Furthermore, the Wahuang clan has been taking care of the human race. Otherwise, with the current strength of the Celestial Court, they would have conquered Pangu continent long ago." Taking a deep breath, Lu Bang said triumphantly, "To tell you the truth, a few seniors of the same generation as the Wahuang clan have shown up. Although the Wahuang clan has rendered boundless merits and magic power, their cultivation bases are not weaker than hers. She can no longer protect the human race this time." Laughing strangely, Lu Bang clapped his hands and said, "Somebody send our guest away. Gao, King Yufeng, you are not welcome here. Please leave now, or I'll report you to the human emperor and report you for your disrespect. If you dare to mess around in my mansion, you will be the culprit who destroyed the brotherhood between the Celestial Court and the Imperial Court of Dayu." Gao spat out a mouthful of saliva and spat loudly. Wu Qi gave Lu Bang a look, then turned and left without saying a word, dragging Gao out of Changel Palace. As he flew on a cloud, Wu Qi told Gao what he had just heard from Lu Bang, as well as his speculations, and asked him to go to the Imperial Palace as soon as possible to report these things to Emperor Haozuan. Gao, who had come early in the morning to congratulate Wu Qi after learning that he had received a special edict to stay in Liangzhu, had his face flickering. He nodded hastily and hurried to Liangzhu with a group of captains. Fearing that Wu Qi did not have any experts he could use, he left half of the captains he had brought with him to Wu Qi, who would be at his disposal. Wu Qi did not say much. He sat in his mansion and unleashed his divine sense to cover the entire Changel Palace, keeping a close watch on everything that was happening inside. As his divine sense sprouted from the chaotic energy, it easily merged with the rich natural energy and Pangu's sacred energy in the surroundings. Every brick, tile, and beam in Changel Palace was penetrated by Wu Qi's divine sense, so that no matter what Lu Bang and the others did, they could not hide from Wu Qi's surveillance. Less than a quarter of an hour after Gao left with his men, Lu Bang came to a secret chamber in the basement of Changel Palace with a group of trusted subordinates. A subtle spatial fluctuation came, and Lu Bang and the others disappeared from the secret chamber. Wu Qi carefully examined the spatial fluctuation with his divine sense. It was a fluctuation unique to short-distance teleportation formations, and according to the direction of the fluctuation, Lu Bang and the others had entered Liangzhu directly, where they had set up a corresponding short-distance teleportation formation. Wu Qi could not help but smack his lips. Setting up a teleportation formation in Liangzhu was a violation of Dayu's prohibition. Even a prince of Dayu would have his entire clan wiped out if he was found to have set up such a formation in his mansion, let alone someone like Lu Bang who had used the formation to enter Liangzhu. How could the human emperor endure this, when an immortal king of the Celestial Court could enter Liangzhu without anyone knowing? Did that not mean that those primordial immortals of the Celestial Court would be able to enter and leave Dayu's imperial palace with ease? Grinning coldly, Wu Qi ordered Huang Liang to command the army and keep an eye on Changel Palace in the prefecture of East Sea. Then he flew up into the sky and sped toward Liangzhu. He stood on a hill outside Liangzhu, hiding behind a big tree. Not long after he waited, he saw a green flying ship flying out of Liangzhu at an incredible speed. It was made of rootless wood and covered with a layer of Gale's tail feathers, hovering in the air. The flag of King Baishan was hung on the ship, and standing at the head of the bed was a young man who looked 70% like King Zhangqiu. The young man had very high cheekbones, a thin face, and a hooked nose that King Zhangqiu did not have. His eyes flickered with a cold gleam as he glanced around, and his thin lips gave off a mean, ruthless, and vicious air. At first glance, One could tell that he was not an easy person to get close to. The speed of the flying ship was so fast that it was almost as fast as the teleportation of a peak-level gold immortal. In just a blink of an eye, it had sped far away. Just as the ship flew over his head, Wuxia transformed into a wisp of smoke and flew up to it, clinging tightly to the deck. Quietly, the bloodline of the gale in his body was activated, emanating an energy fluctuation that was exactly the same as the gale's tail feathers. With that, no one could discover his whereabouts anymore. He had put Aobusan, Gold Horn, and Silver Horn into his interstitial world, so he did not have to worry that they would expose Wuqi's whereabouts. After flying for a quarter of an hour, the flying ship rushed out of Yuxiong Plain. As soon as it was out of the city, a large black flag waved and pulled the ship into a rift in the void, vanishing without a trace. Hiding in a gale's tail feathers, Wuxia was pulled into the rift as well. Chapter 795. In the dark and misty space, there would occasionally be streaks of rainbow-colored light traversing across. They varied in thickness, with the thickest being 10,000 miles in circumference, and the thinnest only as thick as a man's waist. In the thinnest beams of light, some powerful immortals and Buddhas in different outfits could be seen flying across the void. And in the thicker beams of light, various magical artifacts of different colors could be seen flying back and forth at high speed. For example, the flying ship Wuxia was hiding in was traveling in a beam of light that was about 1,000 feet in diameter. Not far away, in another beam of light that was about 10,000 miles in diameter, a continent with excellent natural scenery was traveling across the void with a dull rumble of thunder. On the tallest mountain in the middle of the continent, a Buddha, about 100 miles long and as white as jade, was lying on a huge white lotus flower. His snoring was so loud that the surrounding void was shaking. This was an alternate dimension that Wuxia was not familiar with. These beams of light were the almighty experts who traveled between the various realms in the universe. There were the 9 heavens, the 33 heavens, the ghost realm, the fiend realm, the demon realm, and various outer realms. These realms all used Pangu continent as their core, but many of them did not exist in the same spatial dimension as it. Some worlds were isolated by natural barriers, while others were artificially sealed in different dimensional spaces. Traveling between these realms required a great deal of divine ability and magic power, as well as familiarity with the passages in the alternate dimensions. Hiding under a green feather of gale, Wuxia exercised his chaotic divine eyes, and had a panoramic view of the three-dimensional structure of the world. It was a world shaped like an olive. The thickest part of the olive was Pangu continent, and around it were several small realms isolated by clouds and mists of various colors. They were the realms occupied by various almighty experts such as the ghost realm, the fiend realm, and the demon realm. Above Pangu continent was the void formed by countless outer heavenly realms, and one level above them were the 33 realms shrouded in golden light and purple mist. Above those 33 heavenly realms, there were 9 realms shrouded in mists that even Wuxia could not see through with his chaotic divine eyes. They were the legendary 9 heavens, where countless primordial experts lived in seclusion. Beneath Pangu continent was a shadowy void formed by the energy projections of all the realms above. The mortal world controlled by the immortals and Buddhas existed in this shadowy void. All the stars in the mortal worlds were the energy projections of the billions of stars in the outer heavenly realms of Pangu continent. After being condensed by the immortals and Buddhas with their great magic power, they transformed into the boundless void of the universe in the mortal worlds. Beyond this three-dimensional olive-shaped world was the boundless primordial chaos. Pangu continent was constantly extracting chaotic energy from the primordial chaos to strengthen itself, and the primordial chaos had given birth to countless minor worlds, some of which had various connections with the void where Pangu continent was located. 99% of the ancestor gods worshipped by the oracles of Du came from those minor worlds. The fiends from the outer realms, who struck terror into the hearts of immortal cultivators, also came from this primordial chaos. In the past, several apocalypses of heaven and earth had occurred because the accumulated resentment of the world where Pangu continent was located opened the portals to the minor worlds in the outer heavenly realms, attracting the powerful and bizarre existences from the outer heavenly realms to invade the void where Pangu continent was located, causing great losses to the immortals in the outer heavenly realms. Pangu continent was the core of this world, surrounded by outer heavenly realms and countless stars. Therefore, whenever there was an invasion from the outer heavenly realms, the forces of the celestial court and those itinerant immortals stationed in the outer heavenly realms would naturally be the first to bear the brunt. The reason why Du dynasty was able to station its forces in outer heavenly realms was that the celestial court had forced Du to station its forces there after suffering several losses in silence. It was clear that the celestial court wanted more cannon fodder as a shield, and Du was more than happy to expand his influence in the outer heavenly realms. Therefore, both sides hit it off, and that was how the protector of the people like Yumu was stationed in various heavenly realms. After glancing around with his chaotic divine eyes, and branding the specific spatial structure of this world into his divine soul, Wuxia studied the almighty experts who were shuttling back and forth in the void. His heart sank. The flying ship had been flying at top speed in the void for 24 hours, and all the people he saw were immortals and Buddhas from the Immortal League and the Buddhist League. They were shuttling back and forth in the outer heavenly realms like a school of carps in the river, and he had no idea what they were busy with. He did not see Oracle Du among them. Clearly, Du was only guarding the foundation of Pangu continent, and had ignored the strategic importance of the outer heavenly realms. In fact, the people of the heavenly court and the Buddhist sects had already set up several important checkpoints in the void. It was a small planet, about 1,000 miles in diameter, that Wuxia had seen 6 hours ago, hovering alone in the boundless void. There were palaces and pavilions on it, and 36 layers of defensive formations were deployed, with 100,000 heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals stationed on it. In Wuxia's eyes, the outposts on this planet were enough to choke off the passage leading from Pangu continent to the Fiend realm. If someone from Du wanted to go to the Fiend realm to do something, as long as they broke through the void from Pangu continent into this boundless alternate dimension, they would not be able to avoid the eyes and ears of the heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals stationed on this planet. Wuxia had seen dozens of similar outposts along the way. The people of the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League had cut off almost all the passages leading from Pangu continent to the outer heavenly realms. No wonder Prince Chongqing had to use such a roundabout method to sneak Wuxia back to Pangu continent from the mortal world. The real passages had been cut off, and they could cut off the connection between Pangu continent and the outer heavenly realms with just a few experts stationed in the void. In other words, the coordinates of the teleportation formations deployed by Prince Chongqing and the others in the mortal world were not known by anyone, so there were still a few passages left. Wuxia shook his head. He was too lazy to think about Du's future. That was something for people like the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan to worry about. Carefully, Wuxia produced Dark Yi's celestial tower, and made it hover over his head, quietly accelerating the flow of time a few feet around him. After advancing from a 5th-tier gold immortal to a 2nd-tier gold immortal, Wuxia was now able to accelerate the flow of time in the tower by 500 times. With the acceleration of time by 500 times, a day had passed in the outside world, but a year and a half had passed in the distorted vortex of time where Wuxia was located. The flying ship of Lu Bang and others had been flying in the void for 10 days and 10 nights. With the acceleration of time by 500 times, Wuxia had gained a dozen years of peaceful secluded cultivation. Chaotic energy was surging and circulating in his body, while his natal true flame was madly burning the remains of an ancient immortal in his interstitial world. Specks of golden light kept being stripped out of the remains and fused into Wuxia's bones. The strength of Wuxia's bones grew stronger with each wisp of golden light they absorbed. As time went by, when 3 months had passed in Wuxia's time, he had completely digested the remains of the immortal. The bones all over Wuxia's body had turned purple gold, transparent like crystal. His bone marrow had turned a deep purple, as smooth and delicate as the finest purple jade, exuding a strong aura of life. By now, the strength of Wuxia's bones had become so strong that he could not even tell. Anyway, when he carefully cut himself with the blood centipede sword, it only left a tiny mark on his phalanges. The purple gold bones, purple bone marrow, and the new blood in Wuqi's body had taken on a faint purple-gold hue. The chaotic energy contained in his blood cells was 1,000 times stronger than before, 1,000 times stronger. Moreover, his blood had become as sticky as ointment, exuding a faint fragrance like supreme-grade chalcedony. By now, Wuqi's blood had also become a natural treasure, which had the miraculous effect of bringing the dead back to life. It was said that primordial immortals often used their own blood to concoct primordial immortal pills. After discovering the changes in his blood, Wuqi finally believed the rumor. The enormous willpower of Buddha Futu in his spiritual ocean had been completely digested, and the chaotic energy around him was 10,000 times stronger than before. Because of the Kunwu sword's purification, the chaotic energy had also been compressed by more than 100 times. Now Wuqi could only use the simplest Five Thunders spell, but its power was at least 1,000 times stronger than before. The Great Light Indestructible Umitba treasure scripture had also allowed Wuqi to cultivate it to the realm of minor success. Buddhist cultivation techniques focused most on nourishing one's divine sense and divine soul. So Wuqi's divine soul was now dozens of times stronger than before. His intelligence was clear, his Tao heart was smooth, and his understanding of the heavenly Tao had improved significantly. With such a powerful divine soul, Wuqi spent the next dozen years carefully integrating all the cultivation techniques he had mastered, and deduced the cultivation techniques of the Mortal League, Immortal League, Buddha League, and Fiend League to the peak state of Gold Immortal Realm. Now his bones were strong, his fleshly body strong, and his magic power vast and boundless. With the improvement of the realm of Tao Heart, he naturally reached the peak state of Gold Immortal Realm. With one foot in the realm of Primordial Immortal, and the other in the realm of Gold Immortal, this was Wuqi's current situation. Originally, with the help of the great Tao inherited from the Song of Gale, Wuqi could easily push his realm to the realm of Primordial Immortal, but unfortunately, his natural energy was not enough to support him to make the breakthrough. The energy stored in the Dark Een Celestial Tower was completely consumed by him, and all the energy stones and immortal stones he brought with him were all devoured by the Taotai soul. As a result, there was no energy left in him for him to absorb and use. Now that he was hiding on a flying ship, he could not absorb the natural energy from the outside world, or he would attract the attention of Liu Bang and the others. Although his interstitial world contained large energy veins plundered from several planets, they were the foundation for the development of his interstitial world. Wuqi would never do something like killing the goose that laid the golden eggs before his interstitial world was fully developed. He could not wait to replenish the energy veins from the outside world, so how could he absorb the natural energy from his interstitial world? Therefore, Wuqi could only stay in the realm of peak-level Gold Immortal, staring helplessly at the half-open door of Primordial Immortal Realm in front of him, drooling. Yuxiong Plain. At this moment, Wuqi missed the inexhaustible natural energy in Yuxiong Plain. He had made up his mind to stay in Yuxiong Plain for a long time, not only for himself, but also if he wanted to use Dark Een Celestial Tower to cultivate his direct subordinates in the East Sea province, he would need the support of an enormous amount of natural energy. After all, Dark Een Celestial Tower could not produce natural energy by itself, and all the natural energy had to be absorbed from the outside world. Unable to make a breakthrough, Wuqi could only spend the next few years studying the vast amount of ancient scriptures in his mind, gradually perfecting the various divine abilities and mystic techniques in them. Gradually, he compared the Inferno Hellfiend scripture and a few other less outstanding cultivation techniques with the profound mysteries of the Song of Gale and the Great Light Indestructible Umitba treasure scripture, until they reached the realm of peak-level Gold Immortal. Just as Wuqi was immersed in the boundless mysteries, the flying ship suddenly slowed down. Liu Bang and the others had arrived at their destination. Chapter 796. He had to get used to this situation. Otherwise, in the future, the flow of time in Dark Een Celestial Tower would become faster and faster, and he would not be able to recognize his own subordinates after spending 10 years in seclusion in the outside world, and tens of thousands of years in Dark Een Celestial Tower. When the humans on a planet entered such a virtuous cycle, the immortals and Buddhas would secretly take action, carefully extracting the spiritual energy from the earth veins in other mortal worlds to expand the size and area of their planet. The planet in front of Wuxia and the others was originally about the same size as Earth, but in the past tens of thousands of years, the immortals and Buddhas had filled it with a large amount of spiritual energy in the earth veins, making it 1,000 times the size of Earth. When the size of the planet was almost the same, and the population had accumulated to a certain extent, they would wait for the humans on the planet to exhaust all their resources. Then, in order to snatch the last bit of resources, they would launch a life-and-death battle. On the seaside, a small squadron of 13 warships mercilessly launched a full-scale bombardment on a coastal city. The skyscrapers in the city, which had a population of nearly 10 million, collapsed one after another. The bunkers hidden nearly 100 meters underground were broken by the special armor-piercing shells, and a large number of civilians hiding in the bunkers were mercilessly killed. When the people in the city fled with various means of transportation, thousands of warships flew in from all directions and mercilessly slaughtered the fleeing civilians. On the surface of the sea, huge warship platforms that looked like aircraft carriers were cruising around, and huge warships with terrifyingly large cannons formed a huge formation to bombard each other. It was unknown what kind of crazy charge they used for their cannonballs. Once the cannonballs that weighed several tons exploded, the destructive power would be no weaker than a 1,000-ton nuclear bomb. As long as one of the cannonballs hit, a small fleet would be heavily damaged. Rearing humans in captivity and harvesting faith and virtue was a very difficult thing to do. First of all, one had to make the people on the planet worship one, which was not difficult for the immortals and Buddhas. They just needed to beat the humans on the planet back to a primitive society and show some miracles in front of them, and they would naturally gain their faith. In order to achieve this goal, the immortals and Buddhas had to ensure that the humans on the planet would not develop advanced space technology. They had to keep them on the surface of the planet, and at most, they could only wander around the satellite a few times. Only then would they fight to the death for resources. Smiling, Liu Bang said to Ji Zhuo. Plus, King Tangqiu has saved 800 billion people here, and the natural rewards power bestowed upon him will certainly push him up to the Hongmeng Pengu heaven. By then, King Tangqiu will be strong enough to fight against Buddhas and primordial immortals of Taoism. With a smile on his face, Buddha Futu returned a bow to Liu Bang, then glanced sideways at GMO, the king of Yangqiu, who stood on the prow with a grim face. He nodded and said, "Everything is ready. In just a few days, these exhausted ants will use the strongest weapons they have to launch an apocalyptic attack. When the apocalyptic attack is halfway through and 200 to 300 billion ants are killed or wounded, King Tangqiu will be able to mediate." The satellite was densely covered with steel bases. While Wuxia was studying them, countless soldiers in protective suits were attacking each other from different bases. Obviously, these soldiers were roughly divided into 7 major powers and 2 camps, and they were fighting fiercely against each other. From time to time, weapons similar to tactical low-yield nuclear bombs would be fired, leaving the bases in ruins. The flying ship hovered in the void, with a vast blue planet hundreds of thousands of miles ahead of it. The whole planet was embroiled in the flames of war. There was no distinction between the front and the back, and the highly developed technology ensured that they could strike from all directions without any blind spots. There was fighting everywhere, and there was smoke everywhere. There was killing everywhere. Steel and explosives were harvesting lives to their heart's content. Wuxia did a rough calculation, and found that more than 10 million people were killed in the war every day. On the planet's atmosphere, millions of fighter jets were flying back and forth, whistling through the void and firing missiles that harvested the lives of the enemies. On the ground, billions of soldiers were fighting in mountains, rivers, plains, and forests. They were armed with weapons that were much more advanced than those on Earth, but they were engaged in trench warfare like the one on Earth. All kinds of rapid-fire weapons were harvesting lives like crazy, and a large number of soldiers were killed every second. Smiling, Liu Bang walked up to the deck, cupped his fist and bowed to Buddha Futu as he said, "Buddha Futu, have you arranged everything?" King Tangqiu frowned as he glanced at the fiercely fighting planet, then shook his head with a sneer and said, "It seems easy. You've paid too little, while my father and I have to pay too much. Don't you think you should compensate me more, King of Han? After calculating with his fingers, Buddha Futu turned to Jizhua and said with a smile, there are 11,135 billion living people on this planet. Deducting the number of people who died in the Doomsday attack, King Tangqiu can probably save at least 800 billion people. These people know that they are going to die, and once they are saved by King Tangqiu, the tremendous willpower they will offer is at least equivalent to the magic power of an ordinary Buddha, who has been cultivating arduously for 100 periods. If most of the human beings on a planet awakened their bloodline inheritance at a certain period of time, and obtained powers that they should not have, then the immortals and Buddhas who controlled the mortal worlds would have to carry out a world-destroying plan, completely destroying the civilization of the planet, and allowing it to develop again from a primitive society. The planet where Wuxia lived had been destroyed at least 10 times in just 1,000,000 years, which was an extremely rare occurrence in the mortal worlds. Buddha Futu's complaints had broadened Wuxia's horizons, and allowed him to understand how these immortals and Buddhas operated in the mortal worlds. It was a war between the followers of the Buddhist League and the Taoist League. What was even more amazing was that as soon as the flying ship Liu Bang and the others stopped in outer space, a bright light flashed in the void, and then Buddha Futu, with a fat smile on his face, walked out of the void with 18 fat bodhisattvas. Wuxia put away Dark Ein's celestial tower, and carefully poked his head out of the gale's feather. Buddha Futu was taken aback, and then he immediately cried out. He had not seen Liu Bang for more than a decade, so when he heard Liu Bang's voice, Wuxia had a strange feeling of unfamiliarity. But soon, Wuxia drove the feeling away with his powerful divine will. He shook his head and smiled bitterly to himself. He had to get used to this strange feeling in the future, whether he cultivated in Dark Ein's celestial tower, or went into a secluded cultivation. This strange feeling of unfamiliarity was inevitable in the future. Liu Bang's face froze, while Buddha Futu jumped to his feet as if he had been stabbed in the butt. Buddha Futu growled in a hoarse voice. It seems easy? Do you know how much time and energy it takes us to run a planet like this? Do you know how much capital we have to spend to run a planet that can be harvested in the mortal worlds? It must be said that it was a huge and complicated systematic project. Many times, immortals and Buddhas would be punished by the heavenly rules when they secretly interfered with the development of human society. Therefore, it took an average of half an eon to run a mature, perfect, and harvest-ready mortal world like this planet. In this half an eon, the immortals and Buddhas had to pay a heavy price in order to interfere with and reverse the development of human society, and make it develop according to the path they had set, and the effort they had put in was incalculable. Frowning, Wuxia looked at the blue planet in front of him. Its shape, the distribution of continents, and the shapes of the continents and islands were 90% similar to that of Earth. Even the satellite near it, which should be the moon, was no different from the moon seen on Earth. Even the appearance of the largest craters on the planet was 99% similar. They had to take good care of the people on the planet, and carefully let them develop according to the path set by the immortals and Buddhas. They had to make their science and technology extremely advanced, but their moral beliefs extremely corrupt, turning them into a world full of material desires. Yet, they still had a little faith in the immortals and Buddhas. This was the ideal development model. According to the experience of the immortals and Buddhas, in a society like this where the science and technology were extremely advanced and the moral beliefs extremely corrupt, very few people could awaken those things inherited in the human bloodline. When Wuxia left Earth through the teleportation formation, Earth had a population of about 7 billion, and this planet had a population of about 1 trillion. With a population of about 1 trillion on a planet, one could imagine how congested it was. The only difference from Earth was that this planet was much larger than Earth. Its surface area was about 1,000 times that of Earth, and its gravity was about 3 times that of Earth. When Wuxia scanned the planet with his divine will, he found that the number of people living on this planet was about 1,300 times that of Earth's current population. Every time the world was destroyed, the immortals and Buddhas who carried out the execution would have to instigate natural disasters and slaughter a large number of humans. Therefore, they would suffer a fierce counterattack from the laws of the heavenly Tao, and all kinds of heavenly tribulations would descend. This was a great burden for the immortals and Buddhas who carried out the plan. There was once an immortal and Buddha of the primordial realm, who carried out the plan on a vast planet that had suddenly entered a state of collective bloodline awakening. The flood that lasted for 7 days and 7 nights killed trillions of mortals on the planet. As a result, when the heavenly tribulation descended, the primordial immortal's immortal body was shattered, and he was immediately reincarnated. After that, the human race had to develop and grow stronger. More people meant more faith and more virtues. But in the process of development, one had to pay attention to the development of the race at all times, and not let it get out of control. If, like on Earth, a member of a race suddenly awakened the bloodline inheritance and obtained the bloodline memories, the race had to be wiped out. Gently patting his face, Wuxia fixed his eyes on Buddha Futu. The battle flags of the two camps were also very interesting. One of them depicted an angry wisdom king wrapped in flames and standing on a red lotus throne. When the warriors of this camp charged forward, they were always muttering the name of a great bodhisattva who slays demons and slays devils. The other flag depicted a middle-aged immortal sitting cross-legged on a jade lotus throne, with 3 streams of white smoke rising into the sky from the top of his head, in each of which was a golden armored god of war. When the warriors of this camp fought, they were subconsciously reciting a Taoist scripture about slaying demons and calming spirits. Chapter 797. The Doomsday Thunder was the most lethal weapon mastered by the humans on this planet under the control of the immortals and Buddhas. Its maximum power was equivalent to a full force blow from a 33rd tier heaven immortal, and its smaller yield was equivalent to a 10 million ton nuclear bomb. When the Doomsday Thunder pillar on the satellite shot up into the sky, everyone knew that the people on this planet had gone completely crazy. In order to fight for the few remaining resources, a religious war was waged in the name of immortals and Buddhas. Under the slogan of religion, advanced technology was used to kill their own kind. It was an absurd comedy. However, the humans who were in the middle of it did not feel any sense of comedy. They only felt the endless darkness and the fear of destruction. Once someone used the first Doomsday Thunder, then another pillar of fire, hundreds of miles high, rose from the surface of the satellite, melting a steel base inhabited by millions of people. Wuxia clearly saw millions of human figures suddenly burst into a dazzling light in the red flame, and then instantly turned into the tiniest energy particles, rushing out in all directions along with the violent shock waves. Through the pillar of fire, Wuxia sensed the situation within a mile of the core of the Doomsday Thunder. The space there was distorted, and the temperature was hundreds of millions of degrees. It was a temperature that could only be reached by the ordinary 9 heavens fire, and even ordinary heaven immortals who crafted heaven immortal items could not control a flame of this temperature. With the connivance of the immortals and Buddhas, the power mastered by the humans on this planet was too terrifying. Buddha Futu sighed softly, then turned to look at Jizhua with a strange smile and said, "You see, King Tangqiu, our cost and effort are not as little as what I've just told you. You see, they have used the strongest power they have, and they have caused great damage to these planets. Every planet that was successfully harvested from the power of faith and virtue would be destroyed by the war. All the stars in the mortal world were refined by the ancient immortals and Buddhas, using the bodies of the fallen ancient fiend gods. When the bodies of the stars were destroyed, they had to collect the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and all kinds of materials to repair these stars. This was an extremely complicated and tedious task. The mortal worlds were an exquisite man-made world with a unique power of law, and their bodies were crafted with the bodies of ancient fiend gods. If he wanted to repair the damaged planet of the mortal world, he would have to use all kinds of precious innate grade materials. This was only the repair on the physical level, and the damaged power of laws needed to be repaired by primordial experts at the cost of their origin power. Otherwise, the world of mortals would have an immeasurable flaw because of the damage of a planet, which would then lead to a cataclysmic chain reaction. Several eons ago, there was a certain primordial immortal who guarded the mortal worlds, unwilling to part with his own power of the heavenly Tao, and turned a blind eye to the destruction caused by the sinking of a planet. As a result, Thousands of mortal worlds near the edge of that mortal world were struck by disasters such as land sinking and massive earthquakes in the following month, resulting in the death toll of more than 10 trillion humans. The heavy casualties were all blamed on the primordial immortal. The heavenly Tao had sent a great disaster. When the primordial immortal was meditating, his mind was suddenly invaded by a demon, and after suffering from chi deviation, his Tao foundation was completely destroyed, and he became a cripple. In just 3 months, more than 100 gold immortals, tens of thousands of heaven immortals, and countless disciples of the sect he founded were struck by an immeasurable fiend tribulation, and all of them died. With that as a lesson, no one dared to be stingy with their own power of the heavenly Tao when they were on duty. It took a primordial immortal years to condense a wisp of his own power of the heavenly Tao from the laws of the heavenly Tao, which showed how laborious it was to repair the damage to these small planets in the mortal worlds. For the planet in front of them to be able to develop to its current level smoothly, there were at least 7 primordial immortals guarding it, taking good care of it, and not daring to be careless. Among these 7 primordial immortals, the most had been on duty here for 70,000 years, and the least had been here for 7,000 years. Smiling coldly, Buddha Futa looked at Jizhua, who had a horrified look on his face. Do you still think these virtues are so easy to get, King Tangqiu? Only with 7 primordial immortals on duty here can King Tangqiu smoothly harvest the virtues today. And you can step into the realm of primordial without any hard work. He took a deep breath and said in a cold voice, Do you really think the virtues are so cheap and easy to get, King Tangqiu? Not to mention what King Tangqiu was thinking. Even Wuxia could not help but feel his scalp go numb. In order to obtain the power of faith and the virtues of heaven and earth, these immortals and Buddhas really spared no effort. To make a planet grow to the level it was now, to allow a peak-level gold immortal to easily harvest the virtues and break through the bottleneck of primordial immortal, the cost was indeed not small. On average, it would take half an aeon for a mature planet to be harvested successfully. How many times would it take for billions of mortal worlds to fail in this half an aeon before a planet could grow into what it was now? A chance to break through to the realm of primordial immortal every half an aeon. Most probably many people would fight for it with all their might. Which of those primordial immortals did not have a few trusted personal disciples, and a group of descendants? The more primordial immortals among their disciples and relatives, the stronger their power would be. On average, there was only one chance to break through to the realm of primordial immortal every half an aeon. Anyone who had the ability to fight for it would surely risk their lives to fight for it. But now, the chance had been given to King Tangqiu. Wuxia was very curious. What exactly did King Tangqiu and his father, King Baishan, promise Liu Bang that he could get this chance? Even though the cultivation technique of the human race was the fastest, there were very few warriors who could break through to the realm of Hongmeng Pang to heaven. Without thousands of years of painstaking cultivation, and a great opportunity, it would be difficult for them to succeed. King Tangqiu had gotten a great bargain this time. Buddha Futu kept nagging at King Tangqiu, telling him how difficult it was to manage a planet that was fully qualified for harvesting. King Tangqiu's eyes darted back and forth, and his heart seemed to have flown to some unknown place. He did not take Buddha Futa's words to heart. But Buddha Futa's words had clearly worked, for King Tangqiu no longer mentioned the matter of asking Liu Bang to give him extra compensation. Amidst Buddha Futa's nagging, time flew by. Both sides fighting on the satellite had simultaneously used doomsday thunders, a terrible weapon that could destroy the enemy and themselves at the same time. Wuxia, hundreds of pillars of fire towered into the sky, and the landscape on the surface of the satellite was twisted and deformed by the huge explosion. Then, it was unknown which side struck first, but hundreds of doomsday thunders were launched from the satellite toward the surface of the planet. Some of the doomsday thunders were intercepted in space, while others successfully broke through the atmosphere and hit their targets. At least 100 large cities were enveloped by the towering pillars of fire. Each of them was home to more than 10 million people. And this wave of attack alone had turned more than 1 billion mortals into nothingness. Even in the distant void, Wuxia could sense an aura of brutality and despair pouring out of the planet's surface. Countless tiny flames soared into the sky from all directions, and thousands of doomsday thunderbolts whistled up into the sky, shooting in all directions in a messy manner. No one knew who launched so many doomsday thunders, and no one knew where they were headed. In short, thousands of cities, large and small, were destroyed in the flames, and countless people were wailing and wailing in the shadow of death. Bright lights flickered across the sky as 3 Buddhas, 3 primordial immortals from the Tao League, and a primordial fiend immortal shrouded in surging black smoke appeared with a large group of bodhisattvas, gold immortals, and fiend immortals. At least tens of thousands of immortals and Buddhas hovered in midair, concealing their figures with restrictive magic, as they looked at the planet engulfed in flames with smiles on their faces. The smiles on the faces of the 7 primordial immortals were very relaxed. After tens of thousands of years of hard work, they had finally brought the planet into the final orbit they had planned. Although they were not qualified to let their disciples reap the rich fruits and become primordial immortals, they would all be rewarded handsomely by the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League, and their status in their respective powers would be greatly improved. The 3 Buddhas of the Buddhist League would be rewarded by the Lord Buddha, Amitabha, with the seats of the 8 treasures lotus throne. After careful cultivation, they would possess a portable lotus throne of the innate spirit item level, with an amazing defensive power. The 3 primordial immortals of the Tao League would be given a set of materials to craft a primordial immortal artifact, and during the process, they would be instructed by several top figures of the Tao League to ensure that they could craft a powerful natal immortal artifact. The Fiend Immortal, who originated from the Fiend League, and was now the overlord of a part of the Fiend realm, would be given special permission by the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League to control 100 small heavenly realms and outer heavenly realms for a period in the future. During that period of time, in those 100 small heavenly realms, he could kill as many mortals and cultivators as he pleased, and use their souls and blood essence to refine his body. This was the reward they had earned from their years of hard work in cultivating the planet. Being on duty in the mortal world was a laborious task. The human race was simply too complicated and fickle. Even in the mortal world, there were too many unpredictable factors that could ruin their efforts in a day. They were very lucky to be able to successfully cultivate a mature planet and receive such a generous reward. All the immortals and Buddhas looked at the planet in the flames of war with joy in their eyes like old farmers looking at the harvest fields. They laughed heartily and charmingly, like old men in the countryside who were half drunk from drinking fine wine in their own yards after the harvest. In just 6 hours, the destructive attacks on the planet's surface had entered an uncontrollable state. The top secret bases of the 7 major powers of the 2 camps had launched all the doomsday thunders they had at the same time, blanketing the entire planet in all directions. More than 200 billion mortals had died in the initial bombardment, and the rest were wailing and weeping in the flames of war. Almost everyone who was still alive was kneeling on the ground, weeping bitterly and begging for help from the immortals and Buddhas they believed in. The fear of impending death made these people's faith extremely pious in that instant. The pure and vast power of faith swept across the surface of the planet like a hurricane or tsunami. In Wuxia's chaotic divine eyes, the power of faith had turned into a blinding light, piling up hundreds of miles thick on the surface of the planet. Before long, the thin light was compressed into a viscous liquid, and the power of faith was increasing at an exponential rate. Tens of thousands of immortals and Buddhas stood on clouds in the void, each of them smiling in a carefree manner. At Buddha's summon, the eager King Tangqiu strode toward the planet in front of him with a huge bone talisman in his hand. With immeasurable virtues and faith, King Tangqiu rushed over joyfully. Chapter 798. Boundless Virtue. Boundless Faith. After harvesting as much as he wanted, he would be able to reach Hongming Pangu Heaven, form his minor Pangu golden body, and ascend to the heavens in a single bound. King Yangqiu trembled with excitement. He suddenly felt that King Zhangqiu's death was too wonderful. Why couldn't he have died a few years earlier? Not only King Zhangqiu, but even King Baishan should have died. When he had the overall strength equal to that of a primordial expert, he would inherit King Baishan's throne and ascend to the throne of the human emperor. Only then would his life be worth it. The huge bone talisman in his hand glowed faintly as he was about to throw it out. The talisman was carefully crafted by the high oracles of Diyu's Directorate of Celestials, and it had the miraculous effect of freezing the void in time. With its power, he could destroy all the doomsday thunderbolts in a quarter of an hour, and then perform a miracle in front of hundreds of billions of people, absorbing their faith and faith. At that time, the heavenly Tao would sense that he had saved hundreds of billions of people from certain death, and the heavenly virtues would bestow upon him enough for him to ascend to Hongmeng Pangu heaven. At the same time, with the virtues, he might be able to earn an eon's worth of lifespan. It was said that Gao, King Yufeng, was rewarded by the heavenly Tao for killing the sovereign of Myriad Immortal Alliance, gaining an enormous amount of virtues of the heavenly Tao and an eon's worth of lifespan. Was he not as good as Gao? Amidst his laughter, Gao threw the bone talisman out. A deep, ancient, and distant chant rang out from it, while a great sheet of bright light shot out and enveloped the planet below in a flash. Countless doomsday thunderbolts that tore through the air and were flying toward their target froze in midair, unable to move anymore. The moment Gao threw out the bone talisman, Wuxia, who was hiding under the gale's feather, moved as well. Biting the tip of his tongue and spraying out a mouthful of blood essence, Wuxia immediately produced the natural phenomena medallion. Then the dark Eon celestial pagoda whizzed out, and a large amount of starlight poured down like a waterfall. Countless stars flickered in the small world created by the worldly phenomena medallion. As a peak gold immortal, Wuxia pointed at the profound Eon celestial tower, causing it to shine with a brilliant light. Next, the flow of time within the world enveloped by the worldly phenomena steel suddenly increased by 1,000-fold. This was also the fastest time that Wuxia could control. In this way, only one day had passed in the outside world, but 1,000 days had passed in this small world, giving Wuxia enough time to do something. The 1.08 billion ancient stars in the interstitial world lit up at the same time, and the 16 types of fate they represented: life, death, disaster, fortune, mystery, trap, despair, joy, anger, sorrow, ring, nobility, inferiority, purity, and turbidity, were activated at the same time. Countless fine starlight shot out of Wuxia's body, turning Wuxia into a silver ball of light in a flash. A vast amount of light shot out of his body, resonating with the starlight emitted by the dark Eon celestial tower, and fusing into one. With a sway of his body, the pearl of Shen that Wuxia had obtained in the past unleashed a vast amount of Shen energy, while the worldly phenomena medallion gleamed with a brilliant light. As soon as the strange light shone on the Shen energy, it immediately transformed into a hazy halo. Layers of illusions emerged around Wuxia, and all the tens of thousands of immortals and Buddhas were caught in them. Even Buddha Futu, who was about to produce his pagoda when he realized that the situation was not good, had his eyes glazed over, and was quietly sucked into the illusions. It was during this brief moment of confusion that Wuxia's real trump card was activated. 108 Kunwu swords flew out of his body silently, quickly extracting the power of the starlight in the surroundings, and fusing the 16 types of fate of the stars: life, death, disaster, fortune, mystery, trap, despair, joy, anger, sorrow, ring, nobility, inferiority, purity, and turbidity, to form the fiend-slaying sword formation in the void. The core power of this sword formation was the power of the heavenly Tao contained in the kaleidoscopic star core that Wuxia had obtained. It was the power of the stars that none of the immortals and Buddhas present were familiar with. If they were not familiar with it, it would be very difficult to crack it. Especially when Wuxia activated the power of the stars with the fiend-slaying sword formation, it had increased the power of the formation by several times. In just a flash, Wuxia had completely frozen the entire void, and time suddenly slowed down 1,000 times. Even Buddha Futu and the other 7 primordial immortals present could not adapt to the change in the flow of time, and their movements became extremely strange and sluggish. These primordial immortals on duty in the mortal worlds, including Buddha Futu, had only just advanced to this realm. Their realms might be higher than Wuxia's, but their magic power and divine abilities were not much weaker than Wuxia's. With the exception of Buddha Futu, who had been enlightened by Lord Buddha, Amitabha, the other 7 primordial immortals might not be able to defeat Wuxia in a head-on fight, not to mention that Wuxia had set up a formation to trap them with a sneak attack. Just look at the treasures in Wuqi's hands. The Dark Een Celestial Tower, the best treasure of Diyu's supreme oracle that could control time. The Natural Phenomena Medallion personally crafted by the ancient sacred Emperor Zhuanxiu. The 108 Kunwu swords bestowed by the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan. The brand new law of stars extracted from the kaleidoscopic star core that none of the immortals of today had ever come into contact with. And the Shen energy emanating from the Shen pearl of the primordial mystic sea. Wuqi's formation really had the power to trap and kill primordial immortals. As the Kunwu swords moved, the starlight that blotted the sky turned into 16 dazzling silver vortexes that spun and dragged tens of thousands of immortals and Buddhas into them in a daze. Some of the immortals and arhats with the weakest cultivation bases were torn to shreds by the killing intent in the starlight, and their immortal bodies and immortal souls disintegrated in an instant. The Kunwu swords emitted faint silver starlight and slashed in all directions. Wherever they passed, the immortals whose cultivation bases were weaker than Wuqi's fell like rice under a sickle. The Kunwu swords were a divine artifact. They were the divine weapons personally crafted by the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan to kill Qiyu. None of the immortals and Buddhas present, including Buddha Futu, had fleshly bodies that could be compared with Qiyu's. Wherever the edge of the sword passed, all the immortal bodies and immortal weapons were sliced through like tofu. Golden blood spurted out, and immortal souls and relics flew all over the sky, but they were all swept up by the 16 huge silver halos. 16 types of celestial destinies: life, death, disaster, fortune, confusion, trap, despair, joy, anger, sorrow, ring, nobility, inferiority, purity, and turbidity. Together with the minor worlds conjured by the Natural Phenomena Medallion and the boundless illusions conjured by the Shun's pearls, all the immortals were immersed in the infinite joy, anger, sorrow, and joy similar to the 6 paths of reincarnation, experiencing all kinds of unimaginable and terrifying scenes. Their divine senses were confused by the external force, and they could not detect Wuqi's movements at all. Only Buddha Futu and the 7 primordial immortals, who, after all, had a higher cultivation base than the others, and their divine senses had undergone a fundamental change. They were confused by the formation for about 10 minutes, and then quickly came to their senses. A dreadful power was released from their bodies. They quickly adapted to the strange feeling brought by the time being slowed down 1,000 times, and quickly broke through the illusions created by the Shen pearls. Right now, they were struggling hard in all kinds of miraculous scenes generated by the Natural Phenomena Medallion. But Wuqi did not give them the chance to struggle. After laying out such a great formation, and instantly activating the fiend-slaying sword formation to kill over 10,000 immortals, Wuqi's chaotic energy had been depleted. But then Wuqi gave a soft cry and slapped the top of his head. The soul of Taotai rushed out with a deafening roar. The ferocious Taotai opened its mouth and inhaled, sucking the bodies and blood essences of the tens of thousands of immortals and arhats killed by Wuqi into its mouth. In the blink of an eye, they were transformed into chaotic energy for Wuqi's use. Then the Taotai opened its mouth again and sucked in, swallowing the satellite near the planet that was already in a mess of death and injuries. There were not many living people left. The satellite, which was also 1,000 times larger than the moon, only gave a muffled rumble before it quickly disintegrated into a vast amount of natural energy and fused into Wuqi's body. Wuqi gave a long roar, and the blood centipede sword, his ultimate trump card, transformed into a beam of blood-red light and spun around the necks of Buddha Futu and the other primordial immortals. The blood centipede sword, which was forged with innate killing intent, was extremely sharp. Before they could react, Buddha Futu and the other primordial immortals grunted, and the heads of the 3 primordial immortals and the fiend immortal flew high up into the air. Their immortal bodies had been killed by Wuqi. A beam of golden light rushed out of Buddha Futu's body, and the Buddha's pagoda burst out of his body to block the blood centipede sword. A crisp sound rang out as the sword was knocked flying dozens of feet away. The other 3 Buddhas were shrouded in a dazzling golden light. The blood centipede sword had cut their necks in half, but their most important neck bones were still intact. As soon as Buddha Futu's golden pagoda appeared, he immediately regained his ability to move. He gave a furious roar as he glared at Wuqi and growled, "You again!" With both hands locked into a lotus incantation gesture, Buddha Futu clenched his jaws and slapped it down toward Wuqi's chest. A lotus vajra scepter condensed of Buddhist power whistled out with a golden flame and smashed heavily toward Wuqi's chest. Wuqi gave a cold snort. His body suddenly expanded to tens of feet tall, and his skin was covered with 3 layers of black dragon scales. Then he threw a punch at Buddha Futu's attack with all his might. "Let me see how strong you Buddhas are." Wuqi roared with laughter as he activated the dragon kill. Shrouded in purple mist, Wuqi's fist collided with the lotus vajra scepter. A loud cracking noise rang out, as all 3 layers of black scales on his arm were shattered, and his muscles were torn apart. Only a completely translucent, purple gold arm bone remained perfectly fine, and did not suffer any damage. With a flick of his purple gold finger, the lotus vajra scepter unleashed by Buddha Futu shattered with a rumble. Then Wuqi dashed to the front of Buddha Futu like a bolt of lightning, his arm gleaming like a bone blade as he slashed at Buddha Futu 3,600 times in a row. In just a fraction of a second, he had slashed 3,600 times in a row. This speed was already Wuqi's current limit. Buddha Futu's true form was firmly protected by the pagoda, and Wuqi's bones were extremely tough after absorbing the remains of ancient immortals. So although the 3,600 heavy blows landed on the pagoda and made it glow brightly, it could not break Buddha Futu's defense no matter what. It was a defensive treasure that Lord Buddha, Amitabha, had obtained through countless tribulations. How could Wuqi possibly break it with his current cultivation base? Buddha Futu laughed wildly, as he performed another incantation gesture with both hands, and was about to attack Wuqi. The 108 Kunwu swords around him spun again. The void in the surroundings shook violently, and Buddha Futu and the other severely wounded primordial immortals were dragged into the heart of the fiend-slaying sword formation. 18 blood-red shadows rushed out of Wuqi's body. Blood-draining celestial fiends let out shrill howls and lunged madly at the immortals and Buddhas who were confused by the formation. The Blood Sea Grand Magic was best at absorbing people's blood essence. With Wuqi's current cultivation base as a peak-level gold immortal, wherever the blood-draining celestial fiends passed, as long as their cultivation base was weaker than Wuqi's, their spirit, energy, and digested by the blood-red light. In just a blink of an eye, tens of thousands of immortals and Buddhas on duty were killed by Wuqi, and all their blood essence was absorbed and digested by the blood-draining celestial fiends. With a cold snort, Wuqi glanced at the flying ship, which was spinning rapidly in the starlight shrouded by the sky-veiling flag of chaos. After hesitating for a moment, he finally abandoned Liu Bang and the others and flew straight toward King Tang Qiu, who was frozen in midair and unable to move. The blood centipede sword turned into a beam of blood-red light and swept across King Tang Qiu, cutting him in half before he could even howl. Chapter 799. GMO, who was split in half from the middle, rolled away with a smile on his face. He did not realize that he had been killed by Wuqi. Wuqi released Aobuzin and the 4 dragon pythons, who opened their mouths and tore GMO into 5 pieces of bloody flesh and swallowed them. As a peak-level second Pango Heaven cultivator, every piece of GMO's flesh contained an enormous amount of energy essence, which was the best tonic for Aobuzin and the others. The blood centipede sword shot out in a beam of blood-red light and tore the glowing bone talisman into pieces. Wuqi flipped his hand and pushed his Kunwu swords forward. Driving the sword formation, the Kunwu swords rolled up a boundless silver torrent, suppressing the flying ship where Liu Bang and the others were at the core of the formation. Staring at the planet that was on the verge of destruction, Wuqi shook his arms. The black scales covering his body quickly receded, and the flesh on his right arm grew back rapidly. A great sheet of golden light gushed out of his body like molten gold. With a long roar, he transformed into the golden body of a Buddha with 4 faces and 6 arms. A plume of white smoke rushed out of the top of his head. A water tank-sized, pure white natal relic hovered in the white smoke, emitting a dazzling light that illuminated the whole planet. Silently exercising the great light indestructible Amitabha treasure scripture, Wuqi recited the mantra of the Buddhist League and let out a thunderous roar. "Mortals, what are you waiting for? Do you understand the sins you have committed? The monstrous killing and the boundless sins are all your sins. Every word he uttered turned into huge golden characters that hovered in the void. All the mortals on the planet could clearly see the golden characters hovering in the void. Wuqi's roar went straight into their souls and made them tremble. Their filthy desires were forcibly expelled from their souls by Wuqi with the power of the Buddhist League, when they were on the brink of life and death. Countless wisps of black smoke rushed out of their 7 orifices and vanished amidst the white light that illuminated the whole planet. Wuqi continued to roar. Before you committed the sins of killing, did you ever think about your parents? Did you ever think about your children? Did you ever think about your loved ones? Heaven and earth gave birth to you, but instead of working hard to strengthen your people, you killed each other and committed the endless sins of killing. Your sins are unforgivable. With every word he uttered, Wuqi's Dharma body doubled in size. After a while, Wuqi had grown to tens of thousands of miles tall, and all the mortals could see his colossal Dharma body. The natal relic emitted a vast white light to cleanse the souls of all living beings, forcibly expelling the evil thoughts in the bottom of their hearts. It was as if the rotten flesh was being forcibly gouged out from a wounded body. Even though the pain made these people scream hoarsely, all the evil thoughts in their hearts were completely digested. With a casual point of his finger, a bloody fiend shadow flickered and transformed into Wuqi. A gust of wind rose from the ground, and the atmosphere of the whole planet surged with the transformation of this blood-draining celestial fiend. The gust of wind rolled up countless doomsday thunders, and threw them into the heart of the fiend-slaying sword formation. With a thought in Wuqi's mind, the doomsday thunders, which were powerful enough to destroy the planet 100 times, exploded in the heart of the formation. Vaguely, the furious roars of Buddha Futu and the other primordial experts could be heard coming from the heart of the formation. Clearly, they were badly wounded by the explosion. The doomsday thunders vanished without a trace, and the hundreds of billions of people on the planet's surface were suddenly saved from the disaster. They who were on the brink of death and on the verge of collapse dropped to their knees at the same time and worshipped Wuqi madly. Among them, the believers of the Buddhist League had fallen into a state of near madness. Hundreds of billions of believers almost burned their souls as pure golden power of faith swarmed out of their bodies, quickly turning into a vast golden torrent that rushed into Wuqi's body. Those believers who belonged to the Tao League were still a little hesitant at this moment of life and death. Looking at Wuqi's Dharma idol hovering high in the sky, although they had already dropped to their knees, the last bit of faith and obsession in their hearts had not been eliminated. They knelt to Wuqi, but did not worship him. With a sway of his body, the blood-draining celestial fiend god's clone unleashed a bright light of pure yang that blotted out the sky. He forcibly exercised the innate pure yang universal talisman that he obtained from the dead sovereign, causing 3 beams of light to shoot out from the top of his head. Each beam of light carried a hazy figure that shone in all directions, while the light around him shone brightly like the sun. Hundreds of billions of mortals, who had been shaken by Wuqi's divine ability of the Buddhist League, and whose evil thoughts had been forcibly stripped from their hearts and souls, stared blankly at the blood-draining celestial fiend god's clone that had manifested in the standard form of a Taoist immortal. Suddenly, tears streamed down the faces of those believers who belonged to the Tao League. They fell to their knees piously, recited the Taoist demon-subduing heart-calming sutra, and kowtowed to the blood-draining celestial fiend god's clone. As the light of pure yang illuminated the whole planet, the mortals whose divine souls were injured felt streams of heat flowing in their bodies. Although they were dizzy from the Buddhist League's mantra, they quickly recovered their spirits, and their souls were stronger than usual. The Taoist believers cried out as well, and a power of faith that was 30% stronger than that of the Buddhist believers gushed out of their bodies. The golden torrent rushed whistling into the blood-draining celestial fiend god's clone, and then into Wuqi's body. 2 enormous streams of faith rushed into Wuqi's forehead, and his divine soul began to devour the pure power of faith. Without the need to digest it, the power of faith quickly fused with his divine soul, as if it had always been a part of his divine soul. In just 10 minutes, Wuqi's divine soul had grown 100 times stronger. In terms of the strength of his divine soul alone, He had stepped into the realm of ninth-tier primordial immortal. His divine soul was 100 times stronger, and his intelligence was tens of millions of times stronger. Wuxia was like a giant computer that was suddenly equipped with countless external processors. The speed at which he could calculate the heavenly Tao skyrocketed. Countless profound meanings flowed through his divine soul, and quickly became the laws of great Tao that he could completely master. Lord Buddha's Great Light Indestructible Amitabha Treasure Scripture, Reverend Gale's Song of Gale, Lady Divine Water's Dark Een Water Scripture, the Sovereign's Innate Pure Yang Universal Scripture, the Blood Sea Grand Magic he obtained from Patriarch Yuan Hua, the True Body of Heaven and Earth Scripture, the Dragon Transformation Script, the Dragon Kill, the Primordial Tao of Divinity, all kinds of primordial divine script, and even the Inferno Hell Fiend Scripture and the Celestial Fiend. Battle the Heaven Scripture. At this moment, the souls of hundreds of billions of people merged with Wuxi's divine soul. All the life experiences and knowledge they had gained through thousands of reincarnations were available to Wuxia. Each of them was helping Wuxia analyze the various essences of the great Tao that he knew, and analyzing the meaning of these cultivation scriptures sentence by sentence. The souls of hundreds of billions of people were open to Wuxia without reservation. Wuxia could clearly sense their joy, anger, sorrow, and joy, as well as all their love, resentment, and anger. Exercising the Great Light Indestructible Amitabha Treasure Scripture, Wuxi's powerful divine will wash these people's souls over and over again. Gradually, these people began to have the most filial piety towards Wuxia, the kind of pure love and admiration that only children had for their biological parents. These people's hearts and souls were all tied to Wuxia. Even if Wuxia asked them to die, they would obediently do so. As the divine light of the relic continued to sprinkle down, these people's worship of Wuxia grew stronger and stronger. Regardless of whether they were from the Buddhist League or the Tao League, they had all become absolute fanatics of Wuxia, and their souls had become exactly the same as Wuxi's divine soul. Amitabha. Abruptly, Wuxia discovered this strange change. He was so shocked that he nearly mispronounced his lines. Subconsciously, he opened up his interstitial world and unleashed a stream of chaotic energy. Without putting up any resistance, the hundreds of billions of people on this planet were sent into Wuxi's interstitial world, becoming the most devout believers in it. Wuxia could sense the enormous power of faith offered to him by these fanatics at all times, and he could also sense the benefits brought to him by the improvement of his intelligence because of their existence. If there were hundreds of billions of fanatics on this planet, then how many fanatics did those experienced Buddhas from the Buddhist League, who could create 3,000 worlds, large and small, and each of them had many Buddhist kingdoms in their palms? And how many benefits did they gain from these fanatics? Suddenly, Wuxia understood why both the Buddhist League and the Tao League kept human beings in captivity. It was not only because the power of faith could improve one's magical power, but also because of the existence of these fanatics. Their souls were like cheap processing chips that could speed up one's understanding of the heavenly Tao by thousands of times. Now Wuxi's perception of the heavenly Tao had improved by 10,000 times. It would take an ordinary peak-level gold immortal 10,000 years to comprehend the heavenly Tao, but he could fully comprehend it in just 1 year. His cultivation speed was 10,000 times that of an ordinary gold immortal. The advantage was so great, and the temptation was so great that those ancient immortals and Buddhas had to build mortal worlds to keep so many mortals at all costs. All of your schemes have benefited me in the end. Wuxia gave a strange laugh. With a fierce wave of his 6 arms that were flashing with a strong golden light, the few energy veins on the planet below broke through the rock stratum and flew up, transforming into huge flood dragons that plunged into his interstitial world. Mortal worlds were places where immortals and Buddhas kept mortals, so the natural energy on these planets was not very strong. As a result, the quality of these few energy veins could only be said to be SOSO, not even as strong as those energy veins Wuxia found on White Cloud Planet. Right after he extracted the energy veins, Wuxia was about to plunder some famous mountains and rivers from this planet, and put them into his interstitial world as decorations. But suddenly, a thunderclap rang out in the sky, and a great plume of purple mist came rushing toward Wuxi's head from all directions. A beautiful immortal tune filled the sky, and an immeasurable amount of golden energy drooped down from the sky like a tassel, injecting into Wuqi's body. A tremor ran through Wuqi's body, and he was immediately immersed in an indescribable state. His body was shivering slightly, and gradually, a beam of light that had no color, but seemed to contain all the colors in the world, emerged from the depths of every cell in his body. A gentle breeze wrapped around him. Wuqi's long hair fluttered in the wind, and he fell into a deep sleep like a sleeping baby. Under the influence of the boundless natural virtues, Wuqi curled up like a baby in his mother's womb, and fell into a deep sleep. A tremendous change was taking place in Wuqi's divine soul and body. His body did not move at all, and the only thing that could let others know that a great change was happening inside his body was the dragon scales that kept popping out from the surface of his skin. Scales kept popping out and shattering. In the end, the scales that appeared on Wuqi's skin were no longer pitch-black dragon scales, but purple golden dragon scales that glowed faintly like jade. The translucent dragon scales wrapped around Wuqi's body, making him look sacred and solemn, filled with a suffocating, primordial aura. Hovering off to the side, Audiobook's eyes went wide. He sighed in a low voice and shook his head. An evildoer. He has formed the body of the primordial divine dragon, even earlier than Lao Tzu. How is Lao Tzu going to survive in the future? Chapter 800. Wuqi had no time to pay attention to Audiobook's complaints. An immeasurable amount of virtue entered his body. With billions of devout fanatics providing him with an enormous amount of faith power, it was as if he had billions of processing chips installed to help him understand the heavenly Tao. The virtue quickly transformed in his body. His body and divine soul were rapidly burning and transforming in the chi of heaven and earth, soaring toward an unfathomable realm. In the blink of an eye, 1,000 years had passed around Wuqi. His chaotic divine eyes emitted a vast light that illuminated the void. Everything, including the stars, the human body, and the Kunwu swords, had turned into energy waves that pulsed rapidly and slowly. Energy, or natural energy, was the true face of this world. Pangu continent was also made of natural energy. It was the same in the 33 heavens, the 9 heavens, the ghost realm, the fiend realm, the demon realm, and all the minor worlds in the outer heavenly realms. Even the boundless primordial chaotic void, which gave birth to everything, was the same. The laws governing the use of natural energy constituted the so-called laws of the heavenly Tao of this world. If the heavenly Tao was a tree with deep roots and luxuriant leaves, then heaven immortals were the mortals under it. They used the power of the tree to ward off the wind, rain, and sunlight, and if they were hungry, they could pluck a few fruits from the tree. This was how heaven immortals used the power of the heavenly Tao. In the jungle of the heavenly Tao, heaven immortals were a group of primitive people who were still in the harvesting stage, and could only passively use the power of the heavenly Tao. Gold immortals, on the other hand, had reached a deeper level of using the tree. They could cut down the branches of the tree, make them into sticks or bows, and leave the shelter of the tree to hunt wild beasts. They might be eaten by wild beasts, or they might be able to hunt down wild beasts and obtain delicious roasted meat. Meat, on the other hand, could give them stronger bodies, promote them to better develop their intelligence, and thus have a stronger overall strength. Gold immortals could even drill wood to produce fire, and trigger new energy patterns from wood, which gave them a certain creative ability in the heavenly Tao. But for primordial immortals at their level, they could do more than simply make sticks and bows. They cut down trees and turned them into tall and magnificent palaces at their will. From then on, they no longer needed to shelter from the rain under the big trees. Their palaces made of big trees could provide them with better enjoyment. They used tree trunks as channels to guide water from afar to their homes, so that they could have a clear spring to quench their thirst while sitting at home. They used trees to make wheels, and from there, they had carriages. They could use their own strength to pull heavy objects that were far beyond their own limits, and easily move them around. They could even crush trees and use them to make snow-white paper. On the paper, they could write down their comprehension of the heavenly Tao or draw fascinating paintings. They had evolved from pure power into art, and art could not be erased. From then on, They would not be moved by anything, and ordinary tribulations would no longer be in their eyes. Had it not been for the monstrous war that destroyed their homes and burned their books and paintings, these primordial immortals would have been living peacefully in their fortified residences, without worrying about food or clothing, and spending their days writing and painting, living a carefree life. In that fleeting moment, Wuxia understood what the heavenly Tao was, and what the heaven immortals, gold immortals, and primordial immortals were. As the yellow energy kept pouring into Wuxia's divine soul, his divine soul had easily crossed the threshold of the primordial immortal realm. He now had all kinds of knowledge about how to touch the heavenly Tao, and he had understood all its mysteries. The problem was, he did not have enough power to do all this. For a newborn child, even if he knew the art of making paper, even if he knew how to build palaces, even if he knew how to put down tree trunks and let them rot to grow all kinds of mushrooms and fungi to fill his stomach, he did not have enough strength to do all these things. Wuxi's magic power soared, but he was still far from becoming a basic 9th-tier primordial immortal. A peak-level gold immortal was powerful enough to move the stars in the sky and play with them as if they were balls. Moving mountains and draining seas was a piece of cake for him. But the magic power possessed by the weakest 9th-tier primordial immortal was 100,000 times more than that of a peak-level gold immortal. No more, no less, exactly 100,000 times. This was the biggest difficulty a peak-level gold immortal faced when stepping into the realm of primordial. Without a huge amount of energy stones and immortal stones to replenish energy, without a large number of immortal pills to replenish energy, and without tens of thousands of energy veins for him to absorb, even if a peak-level gold immortal had broken through the realm of primordial, he would never truly possess the overall strength of a primordial immortal. At the moment, Wuxia was hovering in the void. He had used up all his energy stones, and there were no good energy veins in the mortal world for him to absorb. His divine soul had made the breakthrough, and he only needed to wait for his magic power to complete the transformation before he could transform into a real primordial immortal. If it were someone else, be it a gold immortal from the Tao League, a bodhisattva from the Buddhist League, or a human expert like Jizhua, who specialized in one cultivation technique, the power of faith that entered his body would be enough to support him to break through the threshold of primordial immortal. But, as Wuxia cultivated both fleshly body and magic, the amount of energy he consumed was more than twice as much as they did. On top of that, his magic power was chaotic energy. In terms of quality, the chaotic energy cultivated with Scroll of Stealing was several times better than the magic power of a 9th-tier primordial immortal. If Wuxia wanted to make both his fleshly body and magic power break through the realm of primordial at the same time, he needed more than 100 times the energy of an ordinary primordial immortal. As the yellow and black energy fell like rain, Wuxia's divine soul expanded rapidly. He had come into contact with the real profound meaning of heaven and earth, but his fleshly body and magic power could not keep up with his divine soul. At the moment, Wuxia was like 1,000 Einstein's brains stuffed into the body of a baby born with a disability. He had supreme wisdom but no corresponding power, and the feeling of emptiness and powerlessness made Wuxia feel a sense of extreme hunger. Spiritual energy, spiritual energy, spiritual energy. Wuxia needed a lot of it. Saliva sprayed out of the corner of his mouth uncontrollably. Perhaps he was the first immortal to drool when breaking through the realm of primordial. He dared not say that there would never be someone like him in the future, but he was definitely the first in history. His eyes were green with hunger, and his body was trembling. When his greedy eyes glanced at Ao Buzin, Jin Jiao, and the others, Ao Buzin and the others fled in panic. They had the illusion that Wuxia would skin and eat them alive. The yellow and black energy continued to fall for 2 hours. During that time, Wuxia's divine soul emitted a strong purple-gold light that shone for thousands of miles, and his cultivation base remained firmly in the realm of primordial. But his magic power was only increasing very slowly. The faith provided by hundreds of billions of fanatics who were on the verge of death, and almost burning their souls, was enough for any ordinary immortal to form a primordial body, but it was far from enough for Wuxia. The difference was dozens of times, and he needed dozens of times more energy to make up for it. Wuxia's body was trembling violently. Gnashing his teeth, He turned to look at the rapidly vibrating core of the fiend-slaying sword formation. There were 8 primordial immortals, including Buddhafutu. Buddhafutu was protected by the pagoda and could not touch him, but if he could devour the energy essence of the other 7 primordial immortals, it would be enough for Wuqi to make up for the magic power he needed and successfully achieve the realm of primordial. Wuqi let out a long howl, and as he was about to activate the sword formation to kill the trapped people, his divine soul suddenly trembled, and the source of his soul at the core of his enormous divine soul suddenly froze. Wuqi's vision darkened, and he suddenly found himself in his spiritual ocean. A faint shadow was sitting cross-legged amidst the boundless purple-gold aura. Upon seeing Wuqi, the shadow sighed faintly and said, "Your aptitude is really mediocre, and your means are really mediocre. It's taken you so many years to step into the realm of Tao reasoning. Don't you think you've disgraced the legacy of the Scroll of Stealing?" Wuqi recognized the shadow. It was this shadow who had given him the Scroll of Stealing on his way to Myriad Immortals' planet, giving him the opportunity to practice cultivation. He did not know what the so-called realm of Tao reasoning was, so he just dropped to his knees respectfully and said, "Master." The shadowy figure sighed softly, shook his head and said, "Too slow, too slow. Even with the Scroll of Stealing, a supreme technique that can shock the heaven and earth and make ghosts and deities weep, and even force me to be hunted down by those shameless old men, it still took you so many years to step into the realm of Tao reasoning." After counting with his fingers for a long while, the shadow sighed faintly and said, "Years ago, after I comprehended the essence of the Scroll of Stealing, it only took me 7 years to step into the realm of Tao reasoning, and 62 years to step into the realm of Tao breaking. 360 years later, when I was about to step into the realm of Tao fusing, I was hunted by all those shameless old fools of Tao realm. I had to flee for 3 periods, and in the end, my life and soul were destroyed." He stretched out his leg and gave Wuqi a kick, then sighed and said, "Do the math yourself. How long did it take you to step into the realm of Tao reasoning? Stupid, I've never seen anyone as stupid as you." The kick from the shadow was just a shadow, and Wuqi did not feel it at all. The shadow was just a shadow, and it did not have any strength. He stared blankly at the shadow, smiled bitterly and said, "If I may ask, Master, didn't your soul and soul vanish long ago?" The shadow nodded slowly and said, "This is the last bit of energy I have left. If you can't step into the realm of Tao reasoning within 60 years, I'll abandon you completely, so that you can't get the true legacy of the Scroll of Stealing. I'd rather the Scroll of Stealing be buried forever than let a fool tarnish my former reputation." Wuqi's heart twitched. He roughly understood what the shadow was saying. If Wuqi still could not step into the realm of primordial after 60 years, the last bit of energy left by the shadow would dissipate, and the so-called true legacy of the Scroll of Stealing would not fall into Wuqi's hands. At the same time, cold sweat broke out from Wuqi's back. 60 years to become a primordial immortal, and you still think it's too slow? Among the many primordial immortals in the 9 heavens world, which one of them did not spend dozens of eons of hard work to step into the realm of primordial? It was true that one could become a primordial immortal quickly in the mortal worlds, but how many of them were so lucky? Before that, they needed to have the cultivation base of a peak-level gold immortal, and that would take a long time, measured in eons. The shadow spent 7 years to become a primordial immortal, and then the realm of Tao breaking and Tao fusing. Wuqi's head was spinning, and he felt as if he had heard something incredible. After scolding Wuqi for a while, the shadow sighed bitterly and said, "Don't waste time. I need to teach you the last bit of the essence of the Scroll of Stealing, and it's time for me to leave. Alas, those shameless old fools, when you step into the realm of Tao fusing in the future, you must avenge me." He reached out and pressed a hand on the top of Wuqi's head. A wisp of pure divine sense was slowly absorbed and digested by Wuqi's divine soul. Chapter 801. But now, the aura of the great thief had truly fused with Wuqi's divine soul. At the same time, he compared the information he got from Mouse Bai with the information he got from the fragmented memories of Buddhafutu. Most of the almighty experts in the realm of Tao breaking and Tao reasoning had fallen in the past apocalypse of heaven and earth. Wuqi's heart could not help but twitch. So many ancient almighty experts had fallen so easily. No wonder the oracles of the Directorate of Celestials were so extravagant as to use the corpses of ancient Buddhas to make a Vici incense. 100 or even 1,000 phoenixes suddenly turned into old hens hugging their nests. Moreover, they were the kind of old hens that had lost their reproductive function and couldn't even lay an egg. This kind of thing would make all the almighty beings worried that they might be the next one. With such a weak strength, Mouse White had successfully obtained the 9-fire pill from the hands of such a big shot. Because of what he had done, Mouse White had gained the appreciation of a wisp of spiritual energy that contained the law of Grand Thief when the world was created. Because of that, he had successfully fused with this wisp of thief energy. Where were the cave abodes that Mouseby had opened up to store treasures? The Tao Breakers and Divine Immortals were lucky enough to find a few stones in the river, which they built into stone platforms that could survive in the raging river. But unlike the Tao reasoning experts, they had the ability to break through the waves and resist the onslaught of the waves. The waves were the will of the heavenly Tao, and they could break through the onslaught of the heavenly Tao. That was why they were called Tao Breakers. But there was a limit to how many waves they could break through. If an irresistible natural disaster came, they would still be crushed by the endless waves and whirlpools, and their stone platforms would be destroyed. Tao fusing experts and chaotic immortals no longer needed the help of external objects, as they had already transformed into flowing water. No matter how the river rolled, they were already part of the waves. They could use the power of the waves to destroy their opponents, but they themselves were unharmed. This was the terror of Tao fusing experts. Unless the river dried up one day, and all the water disappeared without a trace, Tao fusing experts were invincible. Mouseby was born with a very poor foundation. Even if he had a pair of wings, how good could an ordinary mouse's foundation be? Although it had gained sentience, Mouse White was still the kind of creature that controlled its daily actions instinctively. It didn't know how to use its brain at all. Now that he had the cultivation base of a peak heaven immortal, he felt that he was very impressive. That was why he decided to steal the 9-fire pill, which was a Tao breaking expert. If Wuqi could not reach the realm of primordial within 60 years, he would never be fated with this aura for the rest of his life. With the infusion of his soul sense, a scene of primitive times unfolded in front of Wuqi. There were tens of thousands of almighty experts in the primordial world who were born at the same time as Great Saint Pangu, and millions of innate deities who were born after the world was created. In accordance with the heavenly Tao, countless living beings had emerged from the fusion of various innate auras when Pangu continent was created, and that was the origin of many divine beasts and fowls. Even the weakest of these connate life forms were at the Tao reasoning realm, because they themselves were products of the great Tao. In addition to all the innate creatures, the combination of the heavenly Tao's opportunity and the acquired natural energy on Pangu continent, together with the intentional or unintentional creation of those almighty experts, had given birth to countless living beings in just tens of thousands of years. The Shadow's true form was born in that era. When he was born, he only had the cultivation base of the Jin Dan realm. In that era he was just an ant among ants, a germ on an ant's foot, and no one would pay any attention to him. After stealing unscrupulously for 7 years, Mouse White stepped into the realm of primordial from the peak of heaven immortal realm. To become a primordial expert in just 7 years was sensational even in the ancient times. But that was not all. It took him another few decades to easily step into the realm of Tao breaking from the realm of Tao reasoning, and then another few hundred years to fuse the realm of Tao fusing from the realm of Tao breaking. Compared to the current cultivation system, the realm of force was the overall strength of those below heaven immortal realm, a realm that relied purely on brute force. If he had not met Wuqi, who knew when the scroll of stealing would have found a new successor. The realm of true was the collective name for heaven immortals and gold immortals. They could borrow or use a little bit of the power of morality, but they were still not qualified. A phoenix suddenly becoming an old hen hugging its nest. This matter would make many almighty beings rejoice in the misfortune of others to watch the show. As his divine sense slowly poured into Wuqi's divine soul, more information came pouring in. In the ancient times, meridians, such as the 7 stealing heaven meridians, which could innately extract natural energy from the outside world for one's own use, were common. At least, Mouse White had met no less than 1,000 living beings with 7 stealing heaven meridians, including turtles, crabs, and lobsters. However, after Mouseby was encircled and killed, those almighty experts had probably used some kind of destructive method on the 7 stealing heaven meridians, making the last bit of energy that Mouseby had condensed into a jade medallion had been tossing and turning in the mortal world for countless years, but it still hadn't found a suitable inheritor. The shadow did not have any great ambition. At that time, all living beings in the ancient times had extremely long lives, and even a tiny being like him had a lifespan of several eons. Just like that, he went around all day looking for spirit herbs and spirit grasses to gnaw on, living a carefree life. Naturally, an alliance was formed to hunt down Mouse White. Led by a few fearsome legendary existences of the realm of Tao fusing, all the existences of the realm of Tao breaking and Tao reasoning brought countless underlings to hunt Mouse White. All the almighty experts in the universe went after Mouse White at the same time. Although he had already reached the peak of the realm of Tao breaking, and could step into the realm of Tao fusing at any time, he was still beaten to death. He only had time to spare a bit of energy to condense the jade medallion, which he passed on to the Tao fusing, and randomly threw it into the vast void. It was not long after Pangu created the world. On the newly born Pangu continent, there were countless innate experts of all kinds. It could be said that primordial immortals were everywhere, and gold immortals were as common as dogs. At that time, there was no such thing as primordial immortals and gold immortals. Those almighty experts simply divided their overall strength into the realm of Tao, the realm of True, and the realm of Force. Putting aside the fact that Mouse White's crazy speed of improvement had attracted the attention of many ancient almighty experts, how did he improve so rapidly along the way? Basically, all the almighty experts of the Great Desolate Era had suffered under his hands. If it wasn't their own people who were harmed by him, then it was their descendants who were cleansed by him. There were even a large number of Tao reasoning level almighty experts who were forcibly turned from lofty and tyrannical existences into ordinary mortals. As time went by, and no one knew how many spirit herbs he had harmed, Mouse White suddenly gained sentience, and began to consciously eat the items of those almighty experts. From the dregs of alchemy pills refined by the almighty experts, the residues of tea leaves poured away, and the cores and bones of fruits discarded as food, Mouse White gradually accumulated an enormous amount of energy. His cultivation base slowly grew, and in the end, he had a cultivation base equivalent to that of today's peak-level heaven immortals. Who were those almighty experts who joined forces to hunt down Mouse White? What were the countless cultivation manuals that Mouse White had plundered in the past? The true form of the shadow was just an ordinary white mouse. The only difference between him and his kind was that he was born with a pair of wings on his back, which allowed him to leap as if he was flying, and his speed was comparable to those supreme divine birds. This was also his only special ability. Apart from that, his true form was just an ordinary white mouse formed from acquired energy. A white mouse who liked to steal food from everywhere. Many almighty experts would grin and sigh behind their backs when 10 phoenixes suddenly turned into old hens hugging their nests. Compared to Mouse White's behavior in those years, Wuxia was simply a moral model who adhered to the 5 stresses, 4 beauties, and 3 passions. With a cultivation base of peak-level heaven immortals, Mouse White was bold enough to challenge a Tao-breaking expert. But he had succeeded. Tao reasoning experts and primordial immortals were swimmers in the river. They were adept at swimming, rising and falling along with the waves, and were the so-called tide riders. But once the water surged beyond the limit of their ability, these Tao reasoning experts would be knocked over by the waves, and all their cultivation base would go down the drain. This was the origin of the shadow. And this was the origin of the scroll of stealing. The realm of Tao was divided into 3 levels: Tao reasoning, Tao breaking, and Tao fusing. Using the levels that immortals were familiar with today, they were primordial, divine heaven, and primordial. This was the first thread of innate thieving aura. Mouse White had passed on this aura to Wuxia. With the injection of his divine sense, more and more profound mysteries of the scroll of stealing began to fuse with Wuqia's divine soul. Wuxia was not in a hurry to read the real essence of this part of the scroll of stealing. His attention was focused on another part of the information. The first thread of innate ghost energy created the ghost realm, and the first thread of innate fiend energy created the fiend realm. In the ghost realm, the fiend realm, and the demon realm, there were many primordial immortals. And this thread of innate thieving aura had completely fused with Mouse White's body, which was equivalent to an entire realm. If the heavenly Tao was compared to a river, then Force and True Realm experts were just nobodies who fetched water from the riverside. They could see the river, but they were still far away from it. Perhaps they could scoop up 2 or 3 buckets of water from the river and drink it, but that was their limit. All kinds of information about the primeval times kept pouring into his mind, including the information about the Wahuang clan, who created the human race, and a few other existences of Tao fusing realm. Wuxia flipped through the information like it was a priceless treasure. Although the information existed in his spiritual ocean in the form of a spirit body, Wuxia could not help but gasp. The means of these people were too unimaginable. Even though Wuxia was now a primordial immortal, he was still amazed by their magical means. They stood before him like a towering mountain, and Wuxia could only look up and exclaim in awe. After obtaining the innate thieving aura, Mouse White had comprehended the general principles of the scroll of stealing in just 3 years, and then spent another 3 years to comprehend all kinds of unimaginable techniques. Therefore he began his grand act of thieving. If one's root was not good, he would steal the root of others. If one's comprehension ability was not good, he would steal the comprehension ability of others. If one's blood essence was not good, he would steal the blood essence of others. At first he stole stealthily, but as his cultivation base improved, he simply squatted on the street with a big stick in his hand. When he saw a target that he liked, he would knock it over, then strip the victim naked and steal what he liked at will. When the primeval times first began, those little things of Force and True Realm were even weaker than ants. They were the kind of existences that people would not give a second look at if they were placed on the side of the road, and would not deliberately trample them to death. The real almighty experts were all in the Tao realm, experts who could twist the void within a certain range. Countless information slowly poured into Wuqia's mind, and finally, a hazy and mysterious aura was injected into his divine soul. Wuxia felt a chill run down his spine, and he quickly stopped thinking about it. Chapter 802. Take the Kunwu swords for example. Wuxia only had 108 Kunwu swords now. But as long as Wuxia digested them, fused with them, and fused the wisp of their most original existence into his divine soul, as long as Wuxia had enough strength, 108 Kunwu swords would be nothing to him. With just a thought, he could easily obtain 108 million Kunwu swords. The shadowy figure vanished, and Wuqia's divine soul merged with his fleshly body once again. A terrible hunger struck him instantly. As Wuxia laughed, the bloodlines of over 100 divine beasts and birds in the chaotic energy exploded with a deafening rumble. An enormous amount of energy poured out of these bloodlines, shocking even Wuxia, and quickly fused with the chaotic energy around Wuxia. The existence imprints of these bloodlines were extracted by Wuqia's divine soul, which had fused with the thievery energy, turning into invisible waves and fusing with Wuqia's divine soul. 3 blood centipede swords. This was the limit that Wuxia could manifest with his current overall strength. Moreover, the last blood centipede sword's luster was dim. Obviously, the energy that made up its body was extremely scarce, and its power was greatly reduced. Plants took sunlight and water to grow luxuriantly. This was a thievery. The shadowy figure nodded slowly and said, I've not helped you in vain. But remember, a petty thief will never become a great one. Since you have cultivated the scroll of stealing, you have to go all out and plunder. What is a thievery? A thievery uses the most direct and violent means to plunder everything that they can. A thievery flees 10,000 miles immediately once they fail, so that no one can catch a trace of them. A thievery must learn to hold a grudge, learn to be tough, and never be discouraged. If you suffer a loss from any target, next time, you must make sure to strip him clean, even his neighbors and friends. This is the mentality that a thievery should have. In the past, when the shadowy figure was at his strongest, he had devoured the 3 trigram seal of primal belonging to an almighty Dao-fusing expert. Later, when he was besieged by countless almighty experts, he could only form 108 3 trigram seals at one time at the same time. When the 108 primal treasures of primal attacked the original owner of the trigram seal, his face was swollen, and he had to flee in panic. That battle was the most satisfying for the shadowy figure. His eyes darting from side to side, Wuxia instantly fixed his eyes on the natural phenomena medallion. The scroll of stealing allowed one to understand the principle of thievery, so that one could steal things more easily, faster, and more efficiently. What was the purpose of this? Just to strengthen oneself, so that one could steal things better and faster. Then what is the target of stealing foreign objects? There was no goal. This was the law of heaven and earth contained in the first strand of thievery energy. Just like the other laws of heaven and earth, it existed, so he did it. As for why he did it, he didn't care. Immortals harvesting the world's spiritual energy to achieve an immortal physique was theft. The fiend-slaying sword formation deployed by 108 Kunwu swords or the fiend-slaying sword formation deployed by 108 million Kunwu swords, which was more powerful? When their cultivations were at the same level, an additional Kunwu sword would increase the power of the sword formation. If Wuxia had tens of thousands of Kunwu swords in his hand, and laid out a sword formation at this moment, apart from Buddhafutu, all the other primordial immortals would have been killed by him. Others are like men. To take grain to fill their stomachs is thievery. To drill wood to make fire to keep warm is thievery. To gather cotton and silk to cover their bodies is thievery. However, this was enough to satisfy Wuxia. He said happily, "Wonderful, truly wonderful. What should I swallow next?" The mysterious man nodded satisfyingly, then murmured in a low voice, "Gone, gone, my real body has been dead for so many years, finally I can rest. How tragic was it to be annihilated? Remember the list of enemies I gave you. And if you have the chance, help me take everything they have." He wanted to completely possess them, and fuse them into his body with the ultimate technique of the scroll of stealing, the myriad harmonization grand magic. From then on, they would be Wuxia. But Wuxia was not just them. With a single thought, Wuxia could activate their power with just a wave of his hand, and that would be much faster and better than relying on the power of these external objects. Then, the mysterious man told Wuxia the last bit of enlightenment he had gained, then severely criticized Wuxia for his mistakes and omissions. In the mysterious man's view, the power source of these external objects was important, but their actual existence was meaningless. Fusing them into one's body was the best choice. Just like how Wuxia had cultivated so many cultivation techniques at the same time, and possessed the seeds of a few innate divine flames at the same time. This was the embryonic form of the myriad harmonization grand magic. As long as the chaotic energy was activated, Wuxia could simulate any incantation and release any innate divine flame at will. However, these things were usually fused with Wuxia's chaotic energy, and could not show themselves. A sad cry rang out, as all the soul power of the Taotai beast soul that Wuxia had fused with was devoured by Wuxia's divine soul. And the mark of existence of the source of the soul was fused with Wuxia's divine soul. If there was a need in the future, Wuxia would naturally be able to manifest another Taoye soul. All the living beings in the world were stealing external objects to strengthen themselves. In fact, all the billions of living beings in the world were the thieves of the world. The so-called Great Tao had always been a matter of words. With the mysterious man's guidance, Wuxia felt as if everything around him had been brightened up. Suddenly, he understood many problems that he hadn't noticed before. He pondered for a while, then threw his head back and laughed out loud. "That's right, the ghost realm is formed from a single strand of innate ghost qi. My body has fused with a strand of innate thieving qi. So why can't I form a world myself?" Wuxia's heart turned sour. He bowed respectfully to the mysterious man for 9 times. The mysterious man laughed, then suddenly disintegrated into a tiny stream of light and slowly faded away. After the mysterious man had sent all the information and the strand of thieving qi to Wuqi, his body had become almost transparent. He breathed out a sigh of relief, then looked at Wuqi with a satisfied smile and said, "You still remember to call me master?" Natural energies. Wuqi needed an enormous amount of natural energies to satisfy the needs of his body. However, the myriad harmonization grand magic was a step further. It didn't require Wuqi to store these things in his chaotic energy. Instead, after he devoured their natural energies, all he needed to do was to fuse their existence into his divine soul. Then he would be able to form all kinds of magical arts. In this way, the chaotic energy in Wuqi's body would be purer and more agile. Unlike now, when he was manipulating the natural energies, he still had to consider the interference of the various bloodlines and innate divine fire seeds that existed in the natural energies. Bright lights flashed in Wuqi's eyes as he said in a deep voice, "When my cultivation reaches a certain level, even this interstitial world in my body will be useless to me. I'll just devour it and absorb it. I am a world myself. Why would I need to nurture another world in my body? My body is my own world, and I don't need any external force." After reading the true essence of the Scroll of Stealing, and all the mystic arts in the myriad harmonization grand magic, Wuqi suddenly opened his mouth and sprayed out a stream of divine flame of great tranquility. The pure and serene divine flame enveloped the planet in the distance, which had given birth to over 1 trillion people, and burned it to its heart's content. Thieving was nothing more than borrowing power from other things through various means. Another example was the bloodlines of over 100 divine beasts and fowls in Wuqi's body. These bloodlines were fused into the chaotic energy, and once Wuqi had a thought, he could immediately manipulate the power of these bloodlines and transform into these divine beasts and fowls. This also had the shadow of the myriad harmonization grand magic. Humans had used Panga's sacred energy to create their powerful fleshly bodies, and that was thieving. The true horror of the Scroll of Stealing had officially been unveiled today. Taking a deep breath, the mysterious man said in a deep voice, "Thieving is formed by gathering the spirits of the heaven and earth. For thieving, one fleshly body is enough. You can borrow other external objects, but you don't need to borrow anything at all." Wuqi knelt and bowed respectfully to the mysterious man. "Although I was unconscious at that time, I still remember what happened outside. If not for Master's help, I would have become a wisp of ash long ago. How could I have achieved what I have today? Ferocious beasts prey on the weak to reproduce, and that is what thieving is. Ordinary humans only stole some crops and livestock meat, which was why it was easy for them to die. Immortals, on the other hand, steal the natural energy and the great Tao of heaven and earth, and that is why they can live forever. Mortals could only be regarded as petty thieves, while immortals plundered unscrupulously. Different means led to different results." Glancing around, Wuqi raised his hand, and the blood centipede sword fell obediently into Wuqi's hand. In the blink of an eye, it was devoured by Wuqi with the myriad harmonization grand magic. Then Wuqi waved his hand. A beam of blood-red light shot out of his fingertip, and a brand new blood centipede sword flew out, followed by a second, and a third. Scroll of Stealing. What was the meaning of thieving? An almighty expert who once roamed freely in the ancient times could not avoid ending up like this. Wuqi felt sad and frightened at the sight of this. He could not allow himself to end up like this. Before he truly possessed the strength to do whatever he wanted, it was enough for him and the people around him as petty thieves. The energy emanated from each of them was equivalent to the combined energy of hundreds of peak-level gold immortals. Wuqi did not expect that the energy from the bloodlines of these divine beasts and birds would be so enormous. But when he thought about it, it was understandable. As he knew on Earth, if an ordinary stone was completely transformed into energy, that is, into the so-called energy, the energy released in an instant was enough to shake an entire continent. In just the blink of an eye, the entire planet was transformed into pure energy and poured into Wuqi's body. The terrible hunger was immediately reduced. He opened his mouth, and the supreme treasure crafted by the sacred emperor, Xuanxiu, vanished into thin air. Kunwu sword, blood centipede sword, dark Yin celestial tower, the soul of Taotai, the natural phenomena medallion, and the Pearl of Shun. What was the point of keeping these things? They were also external objects, the aggregations of natural energy. Since they were aggregations of natural energy, they were objects that could be plundered. Devour them, digest them, fuse with them, and fuse their existence into his own divine soul. From then on, Wuxia would be the Kunwu sword, the blood centipede sword, the dark Yin celestial tower, the soul of Taotai, the natural phenomena medallion, and the Pearl of Shun. He was like a hero or a peerless overlord in the mortal world, leading millions of soldiers to conquer the world and unify the world. In the end, he ascended to the high throne and ruled over the world. He borrowed the power of others, and took away the lives and power of others to achieve his own success. This was still a thief. After disintegrating the bloodlines of these divine beasts and birds, Wuxia gave another loud cry, and the seeds of the divine flame of order, the divine flame of void, the divine flame of great tranquility, the divine flame of phoenix, and the other innate divine flames disintegrated at the same time, unleashing a great amount of energy to replenish Wuxia's needs. At the same time, Wuxia fused their existence into his divine soul. After that, with just a thought in his mind, these incredibly powerful and magical divine flames could be unleashed naturally, as if Wuxia himself was made of these flames. Wuxia chuckled and said in a low voice, "This is a real thief, and this is the real scroll of stealing." You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.